Chapter 46-68. Anyone could see the greed in his eyes. From the moment he saw Lin Yi talking to Hu Yudi, he already disliked Lin Yi. This was the perfect opportunity to make things difficult for him. Lin Yi frowned slightly when he heard this. Other than Hu Yudi, these people were insignificant in his eyes. He was too lazy to pay attention to them. He didn't even bother to look at them. However, if they didn't have eyes and provoked him, then there was nothing much to say. "All right, native teammate, there's nothing for you to do here. You can leave." The tall man directly waved his hand to signal the guest to leave. Other than him, no other man should even think about getting close to Hu Yudi. Lin Yi turned his head to look at Hu Yudi. He wouldn't get angry because of a few words from this kind of jumping clown. He would either directly ignore it or directly crush it to death. The key was to see what this little girl was going to choose. Hu Yudi frowned. Finally, she gritted her teeth and said to Lin Yi, "Let's go." "Oh." Lin Yi nodded indifferently. These people didn't enter his eyes. Moreover, this was their internal dispute. Lin Yi had no interest in getting involved at all. TSK, senior sister Hua, what do you want me to say? You actually didn't hesitate to fall out with us for a wild man. People said that you're as pure as ice and as clean as jade. Bah, it turns out that you're just a B*****. You really don't even want your face. Carrie immediately mocked and ridiculed mercilessly. What did you say? Hu Yudi suddenly turned around and glared at her. Even Lin Yi couldn't bear to listen to this kind of filthy words, let alone a girl like her who valued her reputation and integrity. You know what I'm saying? Since you can do this kind of stupid thing, why can't I say it? If I say, do you want to keep it for yourself? You can't be naive enough to think that you can get what we're looking for by pulling in such a wild man, right? You're simply daydreaming. Carrie continued to taunt and ridicule. When Lin Yi heard this, his heart moved slightly. Listening to these words, could it be that these people also came for the Thunder Xian vine? Originally, if it was someone unrelated to him, then he really couldn't be bothered to deal with it. But if it was a competitor. Furthermore, he was so arrogant that it would be inexcusable if he didn't do something about it. Hu Yudi was about to retort, but Carrie didn't give her a chance. She turned to look at Lin Yi and sneered. Country bumpkin. I'll give you a piece of advice out of goodwill. This senior marshal brother Ren Zhongyu and his senior marshal sister was suitor. Not only is he very strong, but he also has a bad temper. You should be careful. Don't die. As Carrie spoke, the tall man called Ren Zhongyu and cooperated with her and sneered coldly. The gaze he looked at Lin Yi shockingly carried a bit of killing intent. It seemed that if he didn't cooperate, this guy really intended to do something. Unfortunately, this person had obviously found the wrong target. Lin Yi's gaze was much colder and sharper than his. When their gazes met, it was Ren Zhongyuan who subconsciously took a step back. This scene really shocked the others. Ren Zhongyuan was a genius disciple of the East Continent Institute. And in everyone's eyes, Lin Yi was nothing more than a country bumpkin. There was absolutely no comparison between them. Who would have thought that Ren Zhongyuan, the genius of the East Continent, would be scared off by a country bumpkin? Having accidentally made a fool of himself, Ren Zhongyuan immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. At this moment, Lin Yi's cold gaze still fell on his face. He indifferently spat out a sentence. Trash, you better not waste my time. Otherwise I'll kill you. What? You actually dare to call me trash? You even said you want to kill me? You're just a country bumpkin, how dare you? Ren Zhongyuan immediately erupted. The powerful aura of a nascent soul-perfected stage expert instantly poured out without reservation. He was originally an extremely arrogant person. Moreover, right now in front of his sweetheart, Hu Yudi, how could he possibly admit defeat? The powerful aura caused the surrounding sand and stones to fly, and the wind to howl. It was a terrifying scene filled with murderous intent. However, Lin Yi stood still in the middle of it. He didn't seem to emit any powerful aura, but the surrounding did not affect him at all. He didn't even blink. Hu Yudi was shocked. She didn't know that Lin Yi had the powerful strength to fight against enemies of a higher level. Killing a profound ascending stage expert was like playing a game. She only knew that Lin Yi's current strength was at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. In front of a person like Ren Zhongyuan, it could be said that he was too weak to withstand a single blow. Senior brother Ren, stop! If that's the case, let's go together. This senior brother Lin's identity is not trivial. You can't be rude to him. Hui Yudi hurriedly stood in front of Lin Yi. Once the two sides clashed, in her opinion, Lin Yi would definitely die. In that case, the previous agreement would be in vain. What? You said that this country bumpkin's background is not small? He's just a country bumpkin, what background can he have? Jieli curled her lips disapprovingly. His name is Lin Yi. He's a teammate arranged by my master. His master is an old friend of my master in the North Island, Shanghai Tianhua. Hui Yudi clenched her teeth and said. Lin Yi glanced at Hui Yudi in surprise. He estimated that she just thought of a lie in a moment of inspiration. However, in Lin Yi's opinion, it was half true and half false. Her brain turned quite fast. What? Shanghai Tianhua? Whether it was Jieli, Ren Zhongyuan, or the other man, they couldn't help but change their expressions when they heard Hui Yudi's words. Obviously, they had all heard of this top boss of the North Island. However, after Jieli recovered from her shock, she obviously still didn't quite believe it. Him? He's a disciple of Shanghai Tianhua? Why haven't I heard of him? Didn't you see that he sat with Shangguan Laner at the birthday banquet before? Before entering the teleportation portal just now, Shangguan Laner was still following him. Think about it yourself. If he wasn't the personal disciple of Shanghai Tianhua, would the little princess of the North Island have such a close relationship with him? Hui Yudi said seriously. Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh inwardly when he heard that. Although it was a cover, it was 90% true. At least it was true that he had been with Shangguan Laner all this time. He didn't expect this girl to be such a master of lying. She was so good at it, and no one could see through her lies at all. Sure enough, after hearing Hui Yudi's words, Ren Zhongyuan and the others had already remembered the scene that they had accidentally glimpsed before. It seemed that Shangguan Laner was beside the person in front of them. In that case, this guy was really a disciple of Shanghai Tianhua. They were the genius disciples of East State College. It was understandable for them to put on a high and mighty attitude when they came out to West Island. After all, the standard of East State was much higher than that of other Heaven Stage islands. However, if the other party was the personal disciple of Shanghai Tianhua, then they were in the wrong place. To be continued. Chapter 4669. That was because Shangguan Tianhua was one of the top powerhouses of the 5 heaven-ranked islands. Even their backers would have to clasp their hands in greeting when they saw him, to say nothing of juniors like them. All right, for the sake of Deputy Island Master Shangguan, I'll bring you along to reap some benefits. Ren Zhongyuan snorted coldly and had to stop bitterly. Deputy Island Master Shangguan? This time, it was Lin Yi who was a little stunned. He had been on Heaven Stage Island for so long, and had some interactions with Shanghai Tianhua, but he had never heard that this person was actually the Deputy Island Master of the North Island. All along, the North Island had always emphasized the 3 pavilions. From top to bottom, everyone would say that it was the 3 pavilions of the North Island. Under this background, even the Island Master was extremely mysterious, let alone the Deputy Island Master. Everyone knew that Shanghai Tianhua was the Pavilion Master of Soaring Pavilion, but not many people knew about his identity as the Deputy Island Master of the North Island. At least, newcomers like Lin Yi who were inexperienced had never heard of it. Seeing how Ren Zhongyuan and the others looked at him as if they were giving him charity, Lin Yi didn't have the hostility he had before. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, especially Hui Yudi's pleading eyes, Lin Yi's lips curled up slightly, and he nodded noncommittally. All right, thanks for the trouble. Although these people were not worth mentioning, if it was not necessary, Lin Yi did not want to have a conflict with the people of the East Continent for the time being. After all, these people had deep backgrounds in various academies. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Lin Yi did not want to make enemies with them. Seeing that Lin Yi was so cooperative, Hu Yudi finally breathed a sigh of relief. From their previous contact, she had already seen that Lin Yi had an indescribable arrogance. Although it was not obvious on the surface, in fact, it was everywhere. She was really afraid that if Lin Yi had a conflict with these people, it would really be out of control. Fortunately, Lin Yi might be arrogant, but he wasn't completely clueless. At least he knew when to yield and when to stand tall. He was not a brainless person. Junior apprentice sister Yu Dai, let's go. Ren Zhongyuan immediately led the way forward. At the same time, he didn't forget to glance back at Lin Yi. I hope you won't be a burden to us. Otherwise, even if you're Vice Island Master Shangguan's personal disciple, it'll be useless. If you die in the trial due to your lack of strength, no one will be able to say anything. Carrie and the other man followed behind her. She also sized up Lin Yi with a profound gaze. With a mocking expression, she said, Hee hee, no wonder senior sister Hua took a fancy to you. So you have such a powerful backer. But still, be careful, don't die. Lin Yi shrugged his shoulders indifferently. It seemed that these guys really treated him as a punching bag. Did they really think that he was a pushover? It was fine if nothing happened along the way. Otherwise, he might end up kicking an iron plate. Don't take it to heart. They took their anger out on you because of me. I'm sorry. Hu Yudi deliberately walked at the back with Lin Yi and apologized in a low voice. Oh, it doesn't matter to me. Lin Yi replied with a faint smile. And that's good. Seeing that Lin Yi's calm appearance didn't seem to be fake, Hu Yudi's eyes couldn't help but show some appreciation. A look of admiration appeared in Hu Yudi's eyes. Although her strength was far from Ren Zhongyuan's and the others, it was rare to see such an indifferent attitude. Compared to those people, it was obvious who was superior. Forgive me for asking, but are you sure there's no problem with moving with the three of them? Lin Yi suddenly asked. His goal with Hu Yudi was the Thunder Xian Ratan. Now, it was obvious that he had disrupted Hu Yudi's original plan and rhythm. If he couldn't obtain the Thunder Xian Ratan like this, he didn't want to waste time with these people. This? Hu Yudi was also a little hesitant. She said with some hesitation. One more person means one more strength. Moving with them can be said to have advantages and disadvantages. Let's take it one step at a time. If it doesn't work, we'll think of another way. Okay. If that's what you're saying, then I have no objections. Lin Yi nodded. It was obvious that Hu Yudi didn't want to say too much. Her words were ambiguous, and he didn't know what she meant. He then asked, Oh, by the way, who are they specifically? Although he could infer some identity information from just a few words, it was, after all, not complete. Lin Yi felt that it was necessary to first find out the other party's background. When there was a conflict, it would be convenient for him to weigh the pros and cons and not have too many misgivings. The man in the front is called Ren Zhongyuan. You also heard this. He is a disciple of East Continent's Soaring Cloud Academy. He doesn't have any background in Soaring Cloud Academy, but he is the son of our academy's Grand Chancellor. Speaking of this person, Hu Yudi's eyes clearly showed a bit of disgust. It could be seen that this suitor was really not in her favor. Grand Chancellor? Lin Yi was stunned. He had heard of positions like Grand Chancellor. For example, his old rival Nantian Aurora was the Grand Chancellor of Middle Island's Cultivator Academy. However, this was the first time he had heard of Grand Chancellor. Yes, this is a special position of East Continent's Academy. In terms of authority, it is basically equal to that of the Vice Dean. The two positions both overlap and oppose each other. To a certain extent, the control of the Academy is even stronger than that of the Vice Dean, because all the Grand Chancellors and students are under the jurisdiction of the Grand Chancellor. Everything is decided by the Grand Chancellor. Hu Yudi explained. I see. Lin Yi roughly understood the meaning of this position. It was mostly because East Continent's Academy was too powerful, so it was specially set up to balance the power of the Academy, so that the Vice Dean could not cover the sky with one hand. After all, the dean of each academy would not have the mood to personally manage the internal affairs of the academy. The other man is called Yi Xiaotian. He is also a disciple of Soaring Cloud Academy. His uncle is a vice dean of Soaring Cloud Academy. Speaking of this, Wu Yudi suddenly paused. She blushed and said in a mosquito-like voice, "He is Jieli's cultivation partner, so he often comes to our academy with Renjong Yuan." Cultivation partner? Lin Yi could not help but look at the two of them strangely. Sure enough, Yi Xiaotian's hand was restlessly groping Jieli's body. He dared to do such a thing in front of them. He was really a weirdo. However, this brat might not necessarily be uninterested in Hu Yudi. Although his reaction was not as big as Renjong Yuan's, his gaze towards Hu Yudi was clearly filled with lust. Eating from the bowl and looking at the pot, this was a common problem of young masters. As for junior sister Jieli, her full name is Yao Jieli. She is the granddaughter of our Morning Pride Academy's vice dean. Hu Yudi suddenly looked at Lin Yi with a deep meaning, then continued to say, "The secular world girl that I told you about before only ended up like this because she offended her." Chapter 4670. No wonder I don't like her. Lin Yi's eyes turned cold. No matter who the secular world girl was, no matter if she was his confidant or not, he had already blacklisted Yao Jieli. Although he didn't plan to deal with her for now, if there was a chance, Lin Yi didn't mind pushing the boat along. Hu Yudi's gaze towards Yao Jieli from behind was not very friendly either. Both of them had the vice headmaster of Morning Pride Academy behind them, and their competitive relationship was fierce, so they had never been on good terms. Especially after the secular world girl incident, the two of them almost fell out, and there were already signs of them breaking up in public. Otherwise, as fellow disciples of Morning Pride Academy, their relationship wouldn't be so bad. "Junior sister Yudi, when did you meet him? How come I didn't know?" At this time, Renjong Yuan, who was walking in front, suddenly took a few steps back and came over. He was obviously jealous of Lin Yi and Hu Yudi's conversation. "My master and his master are old friends. Is it strange that we know each other?" Hu Yudi replied with a cold face. But I've never heard you mention it before. Why did you suddenly come out this time?" Renjong Yuan still didn't give up. "Senior brother Ren, there are many things you don't know about me." Hu Yudi's tone was stiff, and she was clearly a little impatient with this guy, almost falling out with him. "Haha, you're right, that's why I want to know more about you, junior sister Yudi." Renjong Yuan, on the other hand, didn't seem to be aware of it at all. He continued to smile as he glanced at Lin Yi discreetly. As long as he didn't let the two of them whisper to each other, he'd have achieved his goal. Hu Yudi looked at him and didn't reply, but Renjong Yuan wouldn't give up so easily. The other person's attitude was cold, but he still didn't get tired of it. This kind of dogskin plaster was a match for Kang Mingming. As for Lin Yi, ever since Renjong Yuan came over, he simply kept his mouth shut, as if he really had become a follower. In reality, if not for the Thunder Xian Vine, he couldn't be bothered to travel with these people. The five of them continued forward. After walking out of the mouth of the canyon, the front suddenly opened up. Lin Yi originally thought that this was at most a small island, but the scene in front of him shocked him. This was actually a desert. It wasn't a pure desert. Patches of vegetation could still be seen here and there, but at least 80% of what they could see was barren land. It wasn't to say that there wasn't an inch of grass, but it gave off a feeling of death. Ever since they arrived at Heaven Stage Island, every time he went on an adventure or a trial, Lin Yi would basically spend his time in a lush, primitive forest. He did not expect that this time would be an exception. What surprised him even more was that this undulating desert was boundless. It didn't feel like an isolated island in Zhonghai at all. Lin Yi was a little surprised, but his companions didn't seem surprised at all, as if they already knew about it. Thinking about it carefully, it wasn't strange. Morning Pride Academy was a purely female academy, and it had a close relationship with West Island. In the past, even if the trial of West Island was not open to the public, it was not necessarily forbidden for them, so it was normal to know about it in advance. After walking out of the mouth of the canyon, they couldn't see the other trial takers around. These people were all here for the treasures of heaven and earth. Acting separately was the minimum principle. Otherwise, if everyone gathered together, they would have to kill each other when they found some treasures of heaven and earth. That situation was obviously not what they wanted to see. It was not only inefficient, but also stupid. Wait, let's determine the route, Ren Zhongyuan suddenly said. Then he took out a map from his arms. Lin Yi glanced at it from a distance. It should be a map of an island, but this island was obviously much larger than he expected. In terms of area alone, it should be comparable to those big islands in the South Sea. Yi Xiaotian, who was touching Yao Jieli in front, took out a compass from his backpack when he heard this. It looked very exquisite from a distance, and one could faintly feel the fluctuation of a profound formation. This should be a rare high-grade product on the market. No wonder he was the son of East Continent Academy. His equipment was really advanced. The two compared the map with the compass, and soon determined the direction. Ren Zhongyuan pointed to a higher hillside in front of the left, and said, "Go that way!" Ren Zhongyuan took the lead again, and Yi Xiaotian and Yao Jieli followed closely. Huiyuti frowned, opened her mouth slightly, but did not speak, and followed the three people. Did they really come for the Thunder Xian Rattan? Lin Yi couldn't help but feel troubled. Looking at how serious they were, it was obvious that they prepared for this. If that was the case, would his promise with Huiyuti still be valid? Lin Yi frowned thoughtfully. Looking at the attitude of Ren Zhongyuan and others, he knew that they would definitely not share this rare treasure of heaven and earth with him, and even Huiyuti might not get much. After all, it seemed that they were incompatible just now. If it really came to that point, they would inevitably fall out. At that time, should he continue to cooperate with Huiyuti, or simply find a chance to directly take it? After all, if they really fought, the previous agreement would have nothing to do with it. No matter what he did, there was nothing wrong with it. Lin Yi followed them while calculating in his heart. Ren Zhongyuan and others were unaware of this. A mere burden of the early nascent soul stage was nothing in their eyes. These masters of the great perfection of the nascent soul stage did not even put him in their eyes. They did not know that they had become the prey of others. At this moment, they were still immersed in their arrogance, and could not extricate themselves. Ren Zhongyuan led the way in front. The 5 people trekked in the desert for half an hour. Not to mention any crisis along the way, they did not even see a living creature. The scene in front of them was the same. Except for the desert, there was more desert. The only slight change was the terrain. Following the route pointed by the map, everyone found that the terrain under their feet was getting higher and higher. It was originally just a slowly undulating hillside, but now it had become a towering mountain range. The road ahead gradually became narrow, and on both sides were bottomless canyons. However, a desert was a desert after all. Even if the terrain was strange, the scene was really not good to look at. This kind of dull feeling was completely different from the expected crisis. Everyone even couldn't help but have the same doubt. How could there be treasures of heaven and earth in this place? However, things had already come to this point. Everyone could only continue to move forward, praying that this time they would not return empty-handed. Otherwise, all the feelings they had been looking forward to for so long would be wasted. Suddenly, there was a trace of inexplicable warning in Lin Yi's heart. The jade pendant sounded at the same time, and his face immediately changed. He quickly stopped and at the same time, pulled Huiyuti, who was not far in front of him. To be continued. Chapter 4671. You! Huiyuti subconsciously whispered. She didn't expect that Lin Yi, who had always been well-behaved and could even be said to be impatient with her, would suddenly make a move. However, before she could finish speaking, there was a sudden change in front of them. More than a dozen vines as thick as buckets suddenly soared from the ground. With a terrifying sound of breaking through the air, they swept towards the direction of the crowd at a speed that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye. Because of the previous repetition, everyone was more or less careless at the moment, and the attack of these giant vines was so sudden and so fierce that Ren Zhongyuan, Yi Xiaotian, and Yao Jili, who were walking at the front, had no chance to react at all, and were instantly hit by these vines. Only Lin Yi, who was already vigilant, and Hui Yudi, who was pulled by him, barely escaped this disaster. However, Ren Zhongyuan and the other two were masters of the Yuanying stage after all. Even if they were caught off guard and could not avoid it, they still made a response in a hurry. At the moment when they were attacked by this giant vine, Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian were covered with a layer of golden true energy at the same time. The vine seemed to be unable to shake the defense of this layer of golden true energy, giving Lin Yi the feeling that it was like the legendary golden bell cover. As for Yao Jili, although she was not as rigid as Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian, her movement technique was extremely flexible. Her whole body twisted quickly like a water snake. At the last moment, she was barely able to avoid her vital parts, but she was inevitably scratched a little, not to mention that she was wearing a cyan soft armor, so this power was still bearable. Seeing this, Lin Yi raised his eyebrows slightly. Although her character was not good, there was no doubt about her strength. She was worthy of being an elite master from the East Continent Academy. If it was replaced by other masters of the Yuanying stage, they may not be able to make such a timely response. However, the three of them were still covered in dirt. They were almost knocked down into the valley by these giant vines just now, and were instantly whipped back. After retreating a distance with great difficulty, they stared at the giant vines in front of them that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. "What is this thing?" While everyone was shocked, Hui Yudi couldn't help but look at Lin Yi. If it weren't for Lin Yi pulling her, she would definitely be like Ren Zhongyuan and the other two at the moment. She would not be injured, but she would definitely be very embarrassed. Everyone carefully retreated while carefully observing the giant vines that had appeared out of thin air. What was surprising was that such a large number of giant vines actually grew from the same root system. In other words, such an earth-shattering momentum actually came from the same plant. Lin Yi looked at the bottom of this terrible plant. Previously it was difficult to detect because it was hidden in the sand, but at this moment, it was clearly seen that its huge roots had firmly penetrated into the entire mountain, completely blocked the road. How can there be such a strange plant? Seeing that the giant vines were about to attack again, Yao Jili couldn't help but exclaim in horror. Everyone also couldn't help but look at each other. Just now, they felt that it was boring, but now it was really fun. From the moment of exchange just now, they could feel that this giant vine monster's strength was at least above the Yuanying stage. Even if they joined forces, they didn't have much chance of winning against this strange existence. Hui Yudi retreated to a safe distance and carefully observed for a while. Suddenly she said, "This is a dummy vine, a vine monster that has become a spirit. I've seen it in an ancient book before." "Oh?" Upon hearing this, Lin Yi couldn't help but be a little surprised. He had seen all kinds of powerful spirit beasts, but plants were very rare. However, it wasn't that he had never seen them before. At least, there were similar existences in the mountains behind the North Island. During that trip to Half Moon Lake, if it weren't for the ghost that deterred it, Lin Yi would have already become a pile of fertilizer. Although Lin Yi's strength at that time was much lower than now, his intuition told him that although the dummy vine in front of him was strong, it was far from being comparable to the monster in the mountains behind the North Island. After all, the entire Half Moon Lake was the body of that guy. Even the ghost couldn't do anything to it, and the dummy vine in front of him was obviously not at that level. Lin Yi evaluated in his heart. Judging from the fight between Ren Zhongyuan and the others and the dummy vine just now, with his strength, he should be able to kill the dummy vine, but with the strength of the others, it was not so easy to say. "That's right, I remember." After listening to Hui Yudi's words, Yi Xiaotian suddenly shouted, "This is the ancient battlefield, and there are remnants of artistic conception and spiritual energy everywhere. After the plants here absorb it, it is very likely that there will be a mutation. That's how the dummy vine came about. I'm afraid that it doesn't just absorb artistic conception and spiritual energy. Maybe even the remnant spirit of the battlefield will be swallowed by it." Otherwise, how can it become such a terrible monster? Ren Zhongyuan said with a look of fear. It was pure luck that he wasn't injured just now. His protective golden bell was almost smashed by the giant vine. If that really happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. Then what should we do? Yao Jili became more and more frightened. Among the three of them, she was the most embarrassed. The shock that the dummy vine brought to her was naturally far more profound than the others. She immediately panicked and said, "We want to pick the long routes, so this is the only way, right?" "You!" Ren Zhongyuan's face suddenly changed, and he glared at Yao Jili fiercely. It seemed that he was very angry with her for revealing the purpose of their trip. Yao Jili reacted. There were not only the three of them present. Huiyuti was fine, but there was also an outsider, Lin Yi, behind them. "Forget it, it doesn't matter if that kid knows. Anyway, it has nothing to do with him." Yi Xiaotian mediated for her. In fact, Lin Yi was only at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. They didn't put him in their eyes at all. For the sake of Shanghai Tianhua's reputation, they could just give him some things. If he really dared to ask for rare treasures, then they would teach him how to behave. While the three of them were talking, Lin Yi couldn't help but secretly whisper, "What was this long route?" But in this way, the purpose of these three people was not the same as that of Huiyuti. That was to say, they didn't know that Huiyuti was going to find the Thunder Xian vine? Thinking about it carefully, it was normal. Although they were in the same school, the fierce competition could be said to be incompatible like fire and water. It was impossible to achieve a real sense of mutual exchange, especially when it came to strategic-level treasures like the Thunder Xian vine. Huiyuti could probably know it from Lu Ziyu, the master who was on good terms with West Island. People like Ren Zhongyuan might not have this way. R 1152. Chapter 4672. Lin Yi turned his head and glanced at Huiyuti, who happened to be looking at him at the moment. Not only because his previous reaction made her look at him in a new light, but also because she was giving him a look. Don't leak the matter of the Thunder Xian vine, or these people would definitely become big trouble. There were dummies blocking the way in front, and everyone was unwilling to go back like this, so they were suddenly in a dilemma. Lin Yi and Huiyuti, on the other hand, didn't really care. They weren't here for the immortal route in the first place, and they didn't even want to travel with these people. At this moment, they stood at the back and didn't have any intention of stepping forward to solve the problem. "Senior brother Yi, quickly think of a way, what should we do now? Should we change the route?" Yao Jili asked in a panic. "Change the route? How is that possible? Don't you see that there are bottomless canyons on both sides? Even if we can find the second route, how long will it take? Our time is limited." Yi Xiaotian shook his head again and again. The trial time of Yuanying stage peak was at most 1 month. Although it was the longest compared to others, it was still very limited and couldn't afford to waste any time. Yes, even this mountain peak has such a terrible monster. Who knows what is in the bottomless canyon? Maybe it is a mass grave left from ancient times, and there are terrible existences in it that we don't even dare to think about. It's hard to say whether we can survive it or not. Ren Zhongyuan agreed. Doesn't that mean we have no other choice? Yao Jili's face couldn't help but turn a little blue. Just now, it was only one of the giant vines that attacked her, but in front of them was a dense mass of dummies. These giant vines were simply overwhelming, and there were dozens or even hundreds of them. If they were a little careless, wouldn't they be smashed into pieces? There is no other way, there is only one way, we can't give up halfway. Let's go! Ren Zhongyuan took a deep breath, and the protective golden bell on his body appeared again. He braced himself, and took the lead to kill the dummies in front of him. Even though he knew that there was a tiger in the mountain, he still had to go there. He did not want to appear cowardly in front of Huiyuti, especially when there was such a loathsome person like Lin Yi. Although the disparity between them meant that they would not be rivals in love or competitors, what if this brat had ulterior motives and took the opportunity to belittle him in front of Huiyuti? Yi Xiaotian and Yao Jili looked at each other. They had no choice but to follow her. Before they made their move, Yao Jieli intentionally glanced at Hui Yudi and Lin Yi. With a mocking tone, he said, "Don't tell me the two of you intend to just watch and pick up the spoils?" Hui Yudi coldly snorted, and without saying a word, she stepped forward to attack the dummy vine. Although she wasn't willing to travel with these people, she wasn't shameless enough to do so. Moreover, the other party wouldn't let her enjoy the fruits of their labor. Lin Yi had originally thought that for a delicate girl like Hui Yudi, the martial technique she used would definitely be on the gentle side, just like Yao Jieli's water snake-like movement technique. After all, both of them were from the Morning Pride Academy. The martial technique they used shouldn't be too different. However, when Hui Yudi made her move, his eyes suddenly lit up. The girl's martial technique was elegant with speed and decisiveness. It was even better than Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian. When he saw Hui Yudi, who was like a butterfly, easily cut off a giant vine with one palm, Lin Yi couldn't help but smack his lips. He touched his chin and sighed. You really can't judge a book by its cover. Looking at the four people flying up and down to deal with the dummy vine, although Lin Yi didn't want to help, he was also embarrassed to really stand on the side and watch the show. His figure immediately swayed and moved forward. However, he was purely acting. At first glance, it seemed that the giant vines were whistling around him. It seemed to be in imminent danger, but in fact, there was no threat at all. Lin Yi could deal with it easily with the butterfly micro steps alone. As for the super butterfly micro steps and the faster butterfly micro steps, it was purely overkill to use them at this time. Of course, Lin Yi wasn't just dodging. Occasionally, he'd make a move, but it was only when Hui Yudi was in danger that he'd sneakily lend her a hand, giving her the finishing blow. It had to be said that this dummy vine was really fierce and terrifying. So many Yuanying stage perfection joined forces to besiege them, but they were still suppressed by it. Everyone was hit by the fire chi, and the situation could only barely be maintained at 50-50. If they were not careful, they would all be wiped out. Lin Yi took this opportunity to carefully observe. Although these four people were all at the Yuanying stage perfection, when they really fought, Hui Yudi was the strongest, followed by Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian, and Yao Jieli's strength was the weakest. In a short moment, Yao Jieli had been hit by the giant vine from the back, and she spat out a mouthful of blood on the spot. If it weren't for the cyan soft armor to offset most of the damage for her, she might have died on the spot. In contrast, Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian had a defensive martial skill like the Golden Bell, so they were slightly calmer than Yao Jieli, but they were not much better. The damage that the Golden Bell could withstand was limited, and the power of these giant vines had reached this critical point. Once it was broken, the two of them would not feel good either. Among the four people, Hui Yudi's performance was the most dazzling. She did not have the defense of the Golden Bell, and her movement technique was not as weird as Yao Jieli's. Every move was beautiful but could quickly subdue the enemy. Before this, it was hard for Lin Yi to imagine that a weak woman who knew how to act coquettishly could be so powerful. Every time a giant vine got close to her, she did not dodge or avoid it. Now, more than a dozen giant vines had been broken under her feet. This result was more than the other three people combined. After Ren Zhongyuan and the others saw Hui Yudi's performance, they couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. As a man, if they were defeated by a woman at this time, they would be laughed at. Especially Ren Zhongyuan. How could he have the face to pursue Hui Yudi in the future? She just casually mentioned it, and he was ashamed to death. What he didn't know was that Hui Yudi's extraordinary victory was at least partly due to Lin Yi, who had helped her out from behind the scenes. Otherwise, she might have been injured like Yao Jieli. Ah! Ren Zhongyuan immediately roared like a madman, and the protective golden bell covering his body suddenly exploded. The giant vines within a radius of 50 feet were all shattered into powder in an instant. A large number of people were killed and injured in an instant. Chapter 4673. If one did not understand it in advance, the enemy would suffer a great loss. Even if he underestimated the enemy, he might be injured. It was indeed a brilliant martial art from East Continent Academy. After Ren Zhongyuan, Yi Xiaotian also did the same thing. The protective golden bells suddenly exploded another giant vine. In this way, more than half of the nearly 100 giant vines of the dummy vine were removed. The pressure on everyone was greatly reduced, and it was obviously not as difficult to deal with as it was at the beginning. After fighting bitterly for another incense stick of time, the dummy vine was finally destroyed by everyone. At this time, except for Lin Yi, everyone was injured. Needless to say, Yao Jieli was the weakest. Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian took the initiative to explode the protective golden bell. Although the effect was great, they also lost the means to protect themselves. After that, they were injured one after another. As for Hui Yudi, under the special care of Lin Yi, her injury was the lightest. She was only slightly scratched, which was negligible. Humph, a follower who only knows how to take advantage of others, useless. Yao Jieli, who was the most seriously injured, glared at Lin Yi. She wanted to target Hui Yudi the most, but unfortunately, the pile of giant vines at the opponent's feet really made her unable to speak. Who asked her to be less than a fraction of the opponents? We didn't expect him to be of much use in the first place, and we'd be thankful if he didn't drag us down. Anyone with even a little bit of self-awareness and shame would know what to do now. Continuing to follow us with a thick face is going to get us killed, Ren Zhongyuan said with a meaningful look. The meaning of his words was obvious. He wanted to drive Lin Yi away. He wanted this follower to know the difficulties and retreat, so as not to ruin the good things between him and Hui Yudi. Senior brother Ren is right. Hui Yudi suddenly nodded at this time. Lin Yi paused slightly when he heard this, but Ren Zhongyuan was instantly overjoyed. Even Hui Yudi said this, which meant that she had seen the performance of the battle just now, and had finally recognized who the useless trash was, and who the thigh she should hug tightly was. Still not leaving? You don't know what's good for you, do you want us to send you off? Ren Zhongyuan grinned at Lin Yi. His face was full of schadenfreude. Lin Yi raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to speak, Hui Yudi suddenly said, "Let's go. This place is too dangerous. I don't want to go. You guys can go by yourselves." Hui Yudi didn't even look at the crowd after she finished speaking. He gave Lin Yi a look. He turned around and left. Ah? No. What was going on? I was talking about this brat just now, not you, junior apprentice sister, you die. Please don't misunderstand. Ren Zhongyuan was dumbfounded for a moment before he came to his senses. He immediately wanted to chase after her. I know, this is my own idea. It has nothing to do with you guys. I wish you all good luck. Hui Yudi had already made up her mind. She was clearly prepared to use this as an excuse to get rid of everyone. She didn't want to waste her time with them anymore. It was okay for her, but the trial time for Lin Yi, who was at the peak of the early nascent soul stage, was not as long as a month. What? Senior apprentice sister Hua, you don't want the everlasting root anymore? This time, even Yao Jieli was shocked. The everlasting root was the dream of all of them. To say that Hui Yudi didn't care about it was absolute nonsense. This was a rare opportunity to find the everlasting root. How could she give it up halfway because of such a small matter? Hui Yudi stopped in her tracks and nodded at them with a seemingly sincere expression. She admitted, "This is your fate and fortune. I don't have this fortune. If you don't have this strength, then don't even think about it. I still have this bit of self-awareness." Humph, coward! Yao Jieli's expression changed. Hui Yudi's words were basically pointing at the mulberry tree and scolding the locust tree. Her strength was definitely stronger than hers. She was indirectly scolding her for having wishful thinking. Don't worry, I'll protect you. Don't worry, I definitely won't let you get hurt. Ren Zhongyuan hurriedly patted his chest as a guarantee. Lin Yi glanced at him playfully. This guy was already in a sorry state. He hadn't even wiped off the blood on his face, yet he still had the nerve to pat his chest. He really didn't know what to say. There's really no need. It's too dangerous here. The dummy vine is already so difficult to deal with. It almost wiped out all of us. And this is just the beginning. I don't want to take this risk. You guys don't have to persuade me anymore. Hui Yuti's tone was firm. Ren Zhongyuan still didn't give up and wanted to persuade her a few more words. However, Yao Jili, who was at the side, spoke up first. All right then. Since senior sister was so afraid of death, we can't force you. Let's say goodbye here. We'll meet again someday. The reason why she specifically invited Hui Yuti to join them was not out of kindness. It was purely because she was afraid that this little girl and Lin Yu would sneak a step ahead of them and find the everlasting route before them. And now, based on the map and the current situation, there was only one route. As long as Hui Yuti didn't follow them, there was no chance of finding the everlasting route. Since the outcome was already decided, what else did she have to worry about? With her and Hui Yuti's irreconcilable relationship, would she still be worried that the other party wouldn't be able to get the everlasting route and wouldn't be able to get a share of the loot? All along, although Yao Jili and Hui Yuti were known as the Morning Pride duo, in reality, she had always been inferior to the other party. This was because her grandfather's power wasn't as great as Lu Ziyu's, and because she wasn't as strong as the other party. Even when it came to looks, which women cared about the most, she was still inferior to the other party. Not only did she hate this woman who suppressed her in all aspects, but she even wished for the other party to die. If curses could be used, Hui Yuti would have long been cursed by her to the point where she would never be able to reincarnate. Moreover, this time, it wasn't just Hui Yuti alone. She also brought along a burden like Lin Yi to make up the numbers. With this brat's identity as Shanghai Tianhua's direct disciple, she couldn't kill him. What if he didn't have eyes and wanted a share of the loot? Although this was purely wishful thinking, it was still a problem that had to be faced. Now that Hui Yuti took the initiative to quit, Lin Yi naturally couldn't stay. Even if he wanted to stay, everyone would definitely kick him out. Suddenly, there were two guys who wanted a share of the loot. For Yao Jili and the others, this was exactly what they wanted. Yes, she couldn't wait for the two of them to get away as far as possible. Ren Zhongyuan looked at Yao Jili and then at Hui Yuti, who turned her head and left. He still wanted to try to save them. After all, this West Island trial was a rare opportunity to get along. After this village, he didn't know if there would be another chance like this. Chapter 4674. At the same time, Yi Xiaotian also glanced at Hui Yuti with greed. He did have some thoughts about Hui Yuti, but he was not stupid. With his identity and background, it was not a problem to have a mistress other than Yao Jili, but this mistress would definitely not be Hui Yuti. Unless Hui Yuti had fallen, or her master, Lu Ziyu, had completely lost his power, why would she follow him, Yi Xiaotian? He had no intention of giving up on Yao Jili. This girl was much more exciting when she was coquettish than those so-called girls. Moreover, their families were old friends. Coveting Hui Yuti was purely a fantasy. The most important thing now was to serve Yao Jili well. Only then would he be able to obtain more benefits and benefits. Let's go. Hui Yuti nodded to Lin Yi, and the two immediately went back the way they came, parting ways with Yao Jili and the others. Junior sister Yuti! Ren Zhongyuan shouted angrily, but the other party did not turn her head at all, and just waved her hand indifferently. Ren Zhongyuan watched helplessly as Hui Yuti left, especially with a potential love rival by her side. He suddenly had an urge to chase after her. He didn't want to give the two of them a chance to be alone. A man and a woman alone with Hui Yuti, this was a scene that would only appear in his dreams. However, Ren Zhongyuan could not take this step in the end. After Hui Yuti went back, he could still chase after her, but if he missed this opportunity, there would not be a second chance. Looking deeply at Hui Yuti's back, Ren Zhongyuan gritted his teeth and turned to follow the footsteps of Yao Jili and Lu Ziyu. This time, he must get the longevity route. At that time, as long as he divided a little bit, he could let Hui Yuti throw herself into his arms. The two sides parted ways. Lin Yi and Hui Yuti walked for half an hour, until Lin Yi's divine sense could not lock on to the three people, and then he finally took a break. So they don't know about the Thunder Xian Ratan. I thought they were our competitors. Linny suddenly said in a faint tone. Why should we tell them about such an important treasure as the Thunder Xian Ratan? Wouldn't that be looking for trouble for myself? The few of them aren't easy to deal with. If they really find the Thunder Xian vine, it's hard to guarantee that they won't have any thoughts that they shouldn't have. At that time, I will be outnumbered. Hui Yudi shook her head. Haha, that might not be the case. At the very least, that Renzhong Yuan will help you. Linny smiled, but he was even more certain in his heart. For the Thunder Xian vine this time, Hui Yudi was probably preparing to borrow his 5 elements physique. Otherwise, Renzhong Yuan and the other two were all at the peak of the nascent soul realm, and they were all disciples of the East Continent College who knew each other well. Even if she did not have a good relationship with Yao Jili, it should not be a big problem if it was just a cooperation. At least, it would not be as unreliable as Hui Yudi herself said. On the other hand, Linny was just an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. There was no friendship between the two sides. No matter how you looked at it, the 3 people were more suitable to cooperate with each other. The only difference was his 5 elements physique. However, what was the relationship between the 5 elements physique and the Thunder Xian vine? This was a problem that needed to be clarified. Of course, Linny did not intend to open his mouth to ask at this time. When it came in handy, the other party would naturally say that talking too much now would do more harm than good. Hui Yudi was silent for a moment. After turning her head to look at Linny, she changed the topic and said, Your strength seems to be very strong? Oh? Isn't it just the peak of the early nascent soul realm? In front of you experts at the peak of the nascent soul realm, this is considered strong? Linny curled his lips and smiled. For many geniuses who can challenge those who are stronger than them, the strength on the surface is nothing. I believe that you are this kind of person. Hui Yudi smiled slightly, paused and said, Thank you for before. Hee, it was nothing. Linny waved his hand indifferently. Previously, when they were dealing with the humanoid vine, although he secretly helped in the chaos, others like Renzhong Yuan could not see it, but after a few times, Hui Yudi would definitely be able to feel it. Otherwise, she would be too slow. If that was the case, Linny would really have to consider the matter of cooperation. If he cooperated with such a slow girl to find the Thunder Xian vine, it would be fatal. Can I ask, out of curiosity, what exactly is your strength? As a partner, I think we should first clarify this matter, so that we do not make mistakes during the operation. Hui Yudi looked at Linny with a burning gaze. As you can see. Linny shrugged noncommittally. Of course, he would not reveal his true strength to a stranger he met for the first time. Moreover, there was no need for him to lie. At the very least, he was at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. There was no doubt about this. I am talking about your true strength. That humanoid vine, even the few of us could not escape unscathed. Only you were not injured. If you say that you are at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, I will definitely not believe it. Hui Yudi shook her head with certainty. Haha, I'm just good at body techniques. It can't hit me, so of course it won't get hurt. Linny smiled nonchalantly. He didn't bother explaining and kept his mouth shut. Hui Yudi looked deeply at Linny and did not continue to ask. Now was not the time to get to the bottom of it. Since the other party was not willing to confess, then it was enough to know. While the two were talking, they had already returned to a fork in the road. Hui Yudi took out a map from her backpack and compared it to the map. She nodded at Linny and said, And this is the way. After saying that, she immediately led the way. Although it was a bit unreasonable for a girl to take the risk to lead the way, who asked Linny to not know the route? Hui Yudi would not tell him this kind of thing in advance. After the previous incident, Linny had become a bit hidden in her heart. She still had to be careful. The sky gradually darkened and the road ahead began to become a bit difficult to walk on. In addition to the fact that they had been on the road for 6 hours, both Hui Yudi and Linny were somewhat tired. With their strength, it did not matter how long they walked. The key was to advance in this place. Every step they took had to be careful and vigilant. Facing the monotonous desert scenery, they had to be on high alert at all times. After all, the previous humanoid vine was only a small warning. Who knew what kind of terrifying existence they would encounter next? Under this kind of omnipresent spiritual pressure, even a peak nascent soul expert would not be able to withstand it for a long time. Chapter 4675. Therefore, they had to find a way to cross as soon as possible, so that even if they couldn't get the Thunder Xianratan, they wouldn't return empty-handed along the way. It was dusk. Although the sky was gray, the outline of the setting sun could be vaguely seen. Linny couldn't help guessing what the gray was. It wasn't like sea fog, nor was it the unique miasma of the South Island. Looking carefully, there seemed to be a trace of blood in it, giving people the feeling that it was a cloud stained with blood. This was not impossible. After all, this was the ancient battlefield. Even if everything was lacking, there was absolutely no lack of blood and death chi. Suddenly, Huiyuti in front of him let out a groan, and then she fell to the ground without warning. What happened? Linny couldn't help but be shocked. He didn't notice anything unusual, and the jade pendant didn't warn him. What the hell was this girl doing? Did she not give up and deliberately fell down to win his sympathy by pretending to be pitiful, so that she could take the opportunity to ask for more after she succeeded? Wasn't the hole in her brain a little too big? If he was such an easy person to be hooked, how could he bargain with her so quickly in the beginning? What was the point of doing this kind of superfluous thing? Looking at Huiyuti with a strange expression, Linny stood behind her for a moment with his hands clasped. However, Huiyuti didn't get up by herself, nor did she have any intention of calling for help. Did something really go wrong? Linny was a little surprised and walked to her with doubts. Only then did he find that Huiyuti's forehead was sweating, and her face was pale and even a little black. She seemed to be in great pain. Even his breathing had started to become unstable. Linny couldn't help but be shocked again. An expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm couldn't even stabilize her breath in such a short time, which meant that a great change must have happened to her. But just now she just walked normally, and he didn't find any danger. Could it be that she had a relapse of some old disease? What's wrong with you? Linny quickly helped Huiyuti sit up and let her lean on him, so that at least her breath could be a little more stable. Huiyuti didn't answer. Her breathing was rapid and her eyes were lifeless. She probably couldn't even hear what Linny was saying, let alone reply. Linny frowned. He had no choice but to examine her body himself. However, when he lowered his head, he was shocked. Previously, it was difficult to notice it because the dress had covered it. It was only at this moment that she inadvertently moved. Only then did he realize that there was something hanging from her calf. At first glance, it looked like a small lizard, but it had 8 legs, and its head was triangular like a viper's. Its eyes were suffused with an alarming blue light. What is this? Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Huiyuti's sudden reaction had to have something to do with this thing. The thing was small, but it gave off an intimidating aura that wasn't any weaker than the mannequin. In Lin Yi's opinion, it was even more than that. For a moment, Lin Yi didn't know what to do. At this time, Huiyuti suddenly rolled her eyes, and her head drooped down powerlessly. This gave Lin Yi a big shock. This little girl wouldn't die just like that, right? He had spent so much time with Huiyuti just for the Thunder Mystic Vine. Now, he hadn't even seen its shadow. If she was killed by a small lizard, how could he bear it? Lin Yi quickly checked Huiyuti's breath. Although it was weak, it hadn't completely disappeared. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. As long as she wasn't dead, it was fine. He was also considered a miracle doctor, so he had a good way of treating injuries. Since the source of the problem was this lizard-like monster, the first thing to do before treating Huiyuti's injury was, of course, to kill this thing first. Lin Yi's eyes were filled with murderous intent, and he immediately punched out without saying anything. His fist looked ordinary, but he had used 50% of his strength. This strange thing was able to defeat Huiyuti in such a short period of time, so it was not ordinary at all. He absolutely could not underestimate it in the slightest. After punching out, Linny originally thought that this lizard-like monster would either be killed by him or turn to attack him. However, to his surprise, facing his attack, the lizard-like monster just dodged to the side indifferently. It still didn't have any intention of letting go of Huayuti's calf. At the same time it dodged, its evil blue eyes looked up at Linny from below. It seemed to be mocking and provoking. A mere beast also dared to be so savage. Linny was instantly enraged. He no longer took it lightly. Accompanied by a low dragon roar, a small five-element murderous aura suddenly shot out from his palm and hit the lizard-like monster in an instant. With a chi sound, the lizard-like monster was hit head-on by the five-element murderous aura. Only then did it finally let go of Huayuti's calf. After rolling on the ground a few times, it twitched wildly and died in the blink of an eye. Linny looked at the corpse of the lizard-like monster on the ground. Such a small thing could actually force him to use his killer move. The ancient battlefield ruins were indeed full of danger. There were all kinds of strange threats everywhere. After dealing with the lizard-like monster, Linny checked Huayuti's condition again. However, he found that at this moment, her breath had become increasingly weak. If this continued, she might really die. At this moment, Huayuti's calf, which had originally been as smooth and white as jade, had turned purplish-black under the illumination of the moonlight. In particular, the wound that had been bitten by the lizard monster was continuously oozing out a terrifying black liquid, and there were faint signs of rotting. Poison! Linny's heart skipped a beat. Although he could roughly judge from the appearance of the lizard-like monster, at this moment, he really saw that the poison was acting up. Moreover, it was acting up so violently. This was really troublesome. If it was just a simple injury, even if it involved the internal organs, it would not be a big deal in the hands of Linny. After all, he had the universal true chi. However, it was hard to say if she was poisoned. Just the universal true chi alone was not enough. If it was not handled properly, Huayuti's leg would be completely crippled. She might even lose her life. Linny may be a miracle doctor, but that was limited to the common world. He didn't know anything about the weird poisons on this island, and he'd been busy practicing for the past 2 years. He'd never had the time to do any systematic research, especially when it came to these weird spirit beasts. He'd never even heard of them before, so how was he supposed to treat them? Chapter 4676. Senior, do you know what this thing is? Helpless, Linny had no choice but to seek help from the ghost, the former Azure Dragon. This guy should know everything about spirit beasts. Well, strictly speaking, this thing is not a spirit beast, but an insect subject. The ghost thing pondered for a moment. This is an insect? Linny paused as he looked at the carcass on the ground. No matter how he looked at it, it looked like a mutated venomous lizard. He didn't expect it to be an insect. That's right. If I remember correctly, its full name should be eight-legged tooth insect. Although its intelligence isn't very high, its body is highly toxic, and the toxicity is very strong. Even a profound ascending stage master can be easily taken down. The ghost explained. Even a profound ascending stage master can be taken down? Linny was shocked. In his impression, ordinary poisons had no effect on high-level cultivators. Many poisons could easily kill ordinary people, but the effect was greatly reduced for high-level cultivators. Especially at the nascent soul stage, it could be said to be no threat at all. He didn't expect the toxicity of this strange thing to be so strong. Yes, this thing is a rare poison. You can keep its corpse. Maybe it will come in handy in the future. It may be used for alchemy or forging, the ghost thing said. Okay. Linny moved the body of the eight-legged tooth-claw worm into the space of the jade pendant. Then he looked at Huayuti, whose breath was getting weaker and weaker. What about her? If we don't think of a countermeasure quickly, she will die. From the beginning until now, he'd spent so much effort following her for so long, and he hadn't even seen the shadow of the Thunder Xian vine. If Huayuti really died in a place like this, then he'd really be screwed. What should we do? It's very simple. You just need to help her cure the poison, the ghost thing said indifferently. How do I cure this? Linny couldn't help but scratch his head. This is not difficult. The most primitive method will do. Use your mouth to suck it out. The ghost thing laughed. Huh! Use my mouth? Linny almost choked. He coughed for a while and said, Cough. Wouldn't I be dead then? Senior, didn't you just say that this poison can even easily kill a profound ascending stage master? Others will die, but you won't, the ghostly thing said in a confident tone. Why? Linny was surprised. Don't think that I don't know that you're immune to all poisons. Didn't that old Lin make it for you? Your physique has been tempered since you were young. Now that you have become stronger, it will only become more stable. No matter how strong the poison is, it will be useless on your body, said the ghostly thing. You even know this? Linny was even more astonished. The ghost had been with him for quite some time now, but that was only a short time before he came to Sky Class Island. If he hadn't mentioned it before, there shouldn't be any reason for him to know about it. Especially since the matter of his immunity to poison had been exposed to Old Man Lin. Oh, when I had nothing to do, I casually looked through your past and your divine knowledge, see, so I still have some impression of this kind of thing. The ghostly thing curled its lips indifferently. What? You peeped at my memory? Linny was shocked. He had never thought that there would be such a thing before. If it could casually look through his own memory, then wouldn't there be no secrets in front of this ghostly thing? This feeling of being seen was too scary, right? Although this ghostly thing was not an outsider. At least at this stage, Linny and it were bound together. But even so, this feeling of having all his secrets seen by someone else. It really made people shudder just thinking about it. Hey, I have nothing to do anyway, so I used it to kill time and relieve boredom. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your little secrets. The ghostly thing laughed. Can I ask, Senior, where did you learn this shameless behavior from? Why do I always meet such bad people? Linny was suddenly speechless. He didn't feel it when he was not familiar with it, but now that he was familiar with it, he suddenly realized that this ghostly thing was also a playful old man. He couldn't help but think of the old man. Hee hee, don't mutter, kid. Hurry up and treat her poison, it's already spread. If you don't hurry up, this girl will die for sure. The ghostly thing interrupted with a strange laugh. All right. Seeing that the purplish-black part on Huyuri's calf was getting bigger and bigger, Linny didn't dare to think about those useless things anymore. After laying Huyuri flat on the ground, he immediately clenched his teeth and lay down. At this moment, Huyuri's wound had already melted, and black liquid was constantly flowing out. When Linny got closer, he almost vomited on the spot. He used the last of his willpower to resist the nausea and put his mouth on it. While treating Huyuri's poison, Linny secretly felt helpless. He thought to himself that when this girl recovered, he had to renegotiate with her about splitting the profits. Otherwise, she would have sucked the poison for nothing. Lying on Huyuri's calf, Linny didn't feel the slightest bit enchanting at this moment. Although he had a super-strong physique that was immune to poison, the poison of the eight-legged tooth crack worm was really terrifying. Every time he sucked from Huyuri's wound, there would suddenly be a burning pain on his mouth. After a while, the poison in Huyuri's body finally subsided. The originally purplish-black calf gradually recovered a trace of color, and the somewhat weak breath also began to stabilize. However, this made Linny suffer. Although the poison had no effect on him, the burning pain was real. Not to mention anything else, his mouth was almost numb now. Although his mouth was numb, Linny didn't dare to relax at all. Although Huyuri's condition was showing signs of improvement, the poison of the eight-legged tooth crack worm could easily kill a profound ascending stage master. Even a little bit of it could take Huyuri's life. What's more, although Linny was immune to poison, he didn't dare to take it lightly. What if the poison was too overbearing and he was accidentally poisoned? Linny was lying next to Huyuri's leg to treat her poison. At this moment, two sneaky figures suddenly appeared not far away. They were two men. Although they didn't wear uniform, There was a badge with a double cloud spreading wings pattern on their neckline. This kind of badge was also worn by Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian. It was the symbol of Soaring Cloud Academy. Chapter 4677. Because of their low strength, these two people were probably at the bottom of all the participants of the West Island trial. They were disciples of the East Continent's Soaring Cloud Academy, and they could follow the envoy to the West Island, but their strength was actually at the bottom of all the participants. This was really a rare thing. The sun was setting, and it was getting dark at this time. The two people's strength was low, so no matter what kind of ferocious creatures or other trial takers they encountered, it could be a fatal threat to them. So it was not strange that the two of them walked so stealthily. Every step they took was very careful. The two of them moved forward bit by bit, while muttering and complaining to each other. Alas, I don't know what Brother Rin and Brother Yi are thinking. They specially brought us 2 followers to the West Island, but now they leave us behind at such a critical time and let us act alone. It's such a dangerous place. If we're not careful, we'll be killed. Hey, Sun Baolu, are you stupid? This trial is a rare opportunity for Brother Ren and Brother Yi to be alone with beautiful women. How could they take us with them and ruin the fun? One of the men wearing a bamboo hat curled his lips and said, They don't have to leave us behind on purpose. At worst, they can follow them a little further. We won't disturb their good time, and we can help them carry things. Didn't they do the same when they went out to play before? Sun Baolu shook his head helplessly, then lowered his voice and said, According to my speculation, in fact, Brother Rin and Brother Yi didn't leave us behind for this thing at all, but to find some very rare treasures of heaven and earth. What do you think, Liu Zhou? Now that you mention it, I really remember. Before we came to the West Island, when Brother Yi and Sister Yao talked, I heard a few words. It seemed that they were really looking for some treasures of heaven and earth. They had prepared for it for a long time in advance. They just kept it a secret from us. Liu Zhou couldn't help but feel a little resentful when he said this. Humph, I already guessed this. This is the fate of us followers. Good things never happen to us, but bad things happen to us every time. Hey! Sun Baolu laughed at himself. This was something that couldn't be helped. Who asked these people to have no background? In order to establish a foothold in the Eastern Continent College, which was a dangerous place like the Dragon Pool and the Tiger Cave, one must have either strong strength or a deep background. Otherwise, they would be swallowed whole. People like them could only rely on young masters like Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian. There was no other way out. The two of them grumbled softly as they carefully explored forward. Suddenly, Liu Zhou stopped in his tracks. His eyes were looking straight ahead, and his mouth was agape for a long time. What are you doing? Was he possessed by a ghost? Seeing this, Sun Baolu couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He thought they were being targeted by some unknown monster. With their strength in the peak of Gold Core Realm, once such a situation occurred, the outcome would be really terrible. No! Look over there! Liu Zhou stammered. He couldn't utter a complete sentence for a long time, as if he was having a convulsion. He pointed ahead in a daze. Liu Zhou looked in the direction of his finger. With just a glance, he was stunned and couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. After a long time, he gasped in disbelief and whispered, Oh my God! The world is really big and full of strange things. In this kind of place, we can actually meet someone who is having sex in the wild. My God! This woman's body looks so F***ing hot. It's more than that. Don't you think this woman looks familiar? Liu Zhou continued to stare straight ahead and said, Now that you mention it, it's true. Oh my God, isn't this Wei Yudi, one of the 2 beauties in the morning? Why isn't she with Brother Ren? Instead, she is having sex with another man here. I didn't know she was so wild before. Sun Baolu was shocked. More than wild, she is almost unrestrained. I used to think that this girl was an iceberg snow lotus, always with a pure and holy look. I didn't expect that she would become so coquettish when she came to West Island. She actually let that man lie under her skirt and suck. My eyes are so dazzling! Liujo rubbed his hands with his eyes shining. This kind of scene was so exciting that any man couldn't hold it. TSK. I also want to go and lick her, even in my dreams. Sun Baolu couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Hey, do you think I don't want to? Liujo rolled his eyes at him and said with pity. All the good cabbages are taken by pigs. It's a pity that no matter how wild this little hussy is, she is doomed to have no share in it. If you dare to have this wicked idea, aren't you afraid that Brother Ren will kill you? I'm just saying. I don't have the guts. Sun Baolu shrank his neck and swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva greedily before saying, But this Wushuelian is actually having sex with another man here. Isn't our Brother Ren wearing a big green hat on his head? Should we go and take care of it? Hearing this, Liujo couldn't help but be a little tempted. At this time, if he went and took care of it, wouldn't it be a good opportunity to take advantage of them? Even if he couldn't touch them, at least he could see them more clearly. After all, they were the two beauties in the morning, goddesses in the eyes of ordinary disciples like them. However, Liujo immediately suppressed this tempting idea. He patted Sun Baolu's head angrily and said, Do you dare to go? That guy is a master of the nascent soul stage. At this time, in order to treat Ryudi's poison, Linny had to circulate his true chi all the time to prevent the poison from invading his body. Although his body was immune to poison, there was always a higher mountain. What if the poison of this eight-legged tooth insect was more violent than imagined? There was no chance for this kind of thing to happen again. Once something went wrong, he would definitely die. Therefore, at this moment, the aura of a master at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul stage was fully revealed. Even though there was a distance between them, Liujo and Sun Baolu could see it clearly. The two of them were only in the gold core stage. At this time, of course, they didn't dare to jump out and ruin the good thing. Put yourself in their shoes and think about it. If they were having sex in the wild and were disrupted, they would definitely kill in anger. This man was a master at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul stage. The two of them together were not his opponent, not to mention Huyuri, a master at the peak of the nascent soul stage. They didn't dare to move. What do we do? Are we just going to sit here and watch? Sun Baolu frowned unwillingly. Since he couldn't take advantage of it, he could only enjoy it from a distance. Chapter 4678. Ugh, then there's nothing to say. Let's run quickly? Sun Baolu shrank his neck. Compared to admiring Wushuelian's coquettish look, his own life was more important. Don't worry. Leave some evidence before we run. Later, we will let Brother Ren enjoy it, Liujo said as he took out a digital camera from his backpack. In order to curry favor with Wuyuri, Ren Zhongyuan had spent a lot of money to buy it from the Central Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, Wuyuri didn't even look at it before throwing it back. So, after going around in circles, it still ended up in the hands of his follower. No matter where Ren Zhongyuan went, his follower had to carry it for him. This time was no exception. Click, click. Liujo took 2 pictures in a row in front of him, then he turned around and ran without saying anything. Even if the other party was busy having sex in the wild before and didn't find him, he would definitely be discovered this time. If he didn't run, he would be a fool. Sun Baolu looked at it reluctantly, then he followed Liujo and fled in a hurry, for fear that the other party would recover. They didn't know that the two of them had been noticed by Lin Yi from the beginning. Although the distance was not close, and he couldn't hear what the two of them were talking about, Lin Yi had received training since childhood. Always observing the environment was the introductory course of an assassin. Even without divine sense, he could clearly detect the two of them. However, he didn't dare to further lock with divine sense at this time. After detecting the two of them, he felt that a light flashed, and then the two of them ran away. It wasn't that Lin Yi didn't want to get up and catch these two sneaky guys. The problem was that he was busy treating Huyuri's poison. He must be fully focused at all times. He didn't even dare to release his divine sense. He was afraid that he would be disturbed if he was distracted. How could he stop halfway? These two weren't important to Linny, so it didn't matter if they ran. As long as they didn't do anything bad, the urgent matter at hand was to suck out all the poison in Huyuti's body as soon as possible. Otherwise, not only this chick would suffer. Even the Thunder Schwanting would definitely have no chance. After another half an hour, Lin Yi's whole mouth was completely numb by the venom. Huyuti's calf regained some color, and it wasn't as ghastly as before. Huyuti moaned as she opened her eyes. This was a normal reaction after most of the toxins in her body had been sucked out by Lin Yi. However, she immediately screamed when she opened her eyes. Anyone who woke up and saw a man burying his head under her skirt would definitely have the same reaction. Huyuti was both angry and embarrassed. She screamed and lifted her leg to kick Lin Yi. However, the result made her even more frightened. She suddenly found that she couldn't move her legs. At this moment, although Lin Yi had helped her suck out most of the poison, there was still some left. Moreover, the leg was the most important part of the bite. Even with Lin Yi's strong physique that was immune to poison, just helping her suck out the poison made his mouth numb. If she could lift her leg and kick him at this time, then she would really be seeing a ghost. You big pervert! What have you done to me? Why did you fix my body in place and not let me move? Huyuti was so embarrassed and angry that tears came out. She had a pure body and had never even held a man's hand before. How could she endure such a sudden and huge stimulation? At this moment, she wanted nothing more than to perish together with this shameless beast, Lin Yi. Huh! What nonsense are you talking about? Lin Yi was stunned when he heard this. He then raised his head with a strange expression. The worst thing was that the corner of his mouth hadn't been wiped clean, and there was saliva that could easily make one's imagination run wild. What made people even more speechless was that his mouth was a little numb. At this moment, he spoke in a muffled voice. People would think that he had swallowed something in his mouth. Huyuti almost fainted when she saw this. At this moment, not only her legs, but her entire lower body was basically numb. Moreover, Lin Yi just happened to be lying under her skirt. She thought that Lin Yi had been sucking on her private parts. Immediately, she was shocked and angry. She scolded, "You shameless! You bastard! F***ck!" Lin Yi finally understood the misunderstanding and immediately stood up. He coldly stared at Huyuti and said, "Little girl, what do you want? I risked my life to help you suck out that strange worm's fatal poison, and you still call me a shameless bastard? Fine. Since it's like this, you can slowly lie here. I won't accompany you anymore, bye-bye." The relationship between Lin Yi and this little girl couldn't be said to be good. This time, he had risked his life to treat her poison, which was already extremely benevolent. He didn't expect that the other party didn't even know a fart, and actually scolded him. Really, a good person can't be a good person. A dog that bites Lu Dongbin doesn't recognize a good person's kindness. Seeing that after Lin Yi finished speaking, he patted his butt and left without hesitation, Huyuti suddenly remembered that she seemed to have been bitten by something. Then, very quickly, her whole body went numb and she fainted. So it really wasn't Lin Yi's doing? Did I misunderstand him? Thinking of this, Huyuti subconsciously moved. She discovered that other than the leg that wanted to kick Lin Yi, although the other parts of her body were a little numb, they weren't completely immobile. Especially the upper half of her body that was less affected by the poison, she could basically move freely. Huyuti was a little dumbfounded. She wasn't a one-track-minded idiot. The facts were in front of her, and it could be said that it was obvious. Just now, the poison of the strange worm could knock her down in the blink of an eye. With such a strong poison, if no one detoxified it for her, the consequences would be obvious. But now, her body was much better. This meant that Lin Yi was indeed detoxifying her just now. It was just that because the poison was in a special place, this posture was more likely to be misunderstood. Wait! You wait! Huyuti didn't dare to hesitate anymore. She hurriedly screamed and wanted to get up to chase after Lin Yi. Not only did she wrongly blame a good person, But if Lin Yi really abandoned her in a fit of anger, with her current state, she couldn't even stand up. Being left here alone was simply impossible to call for help. At that time, if anything happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. What else do you want? Lin Yi turned around and glanced at her. He said unhappily, Isn't it exactly what you want for a shameless bastard like me to stay away from you? Lest I do something to you that can't see the light of day again. It's good to break up like this. Don't worry, I also save trouble. It's the best of both worlds. Don't go! Hui Yuri's pretty face blushed. If it wasn't for the veil covering her face, it could be seen that her face was so red that it was about to drip blood. She weakly muttered, Sorry, I wrongly blamed you. Chapter 4679. Lin Yi turned around and walked back to Hui Yuri's side. He didn't really want to leave. After all, leaving a weak girl who couldn't move in this dangerous wilderness was something he couldn't do. Thank you? Hui Yuri thanked him softly with a red face. At the same time, she was a little surprised. She thought that Lin Yi would really leave after suffering such injustice. She didn't expect him to be so easy to talk to. She really didn't see it before. She didn't know why, but after this misunderstanding, Hui Yuri felt that Lin Yi had become a lot more reliable. At the very least, it was a completely different image compared to the one she had when she was trying to extort money from him. Unexpectedly, just as her impression of him improved, Lin Yi's next words caused the trust that she had built up with so much difficulty to collapse by a lot. You're welcome, but we have to have a good talk. Talk about what? Hui Yuri had just woken up. Her head was still a little swollen, and she couldn't react for a moment. Of course it's to have a good talk about repayment. You can't be so naive to think that I would save you for nothing, right? In any case, you're a genius disciple from Morning Pride Academy. You shouldn't be so ignorant of the ways of the world, right? Lin Yi looked at Hui Yuri with a sneaky smile. You want? Hui Yuri saw Lin Yi's expression and immediately became nervous again. It was just that before, it was pure shock and anger, but now, she couldn't help but have some shyness of a young girl. She was originally beautiful and moving, but now, she became even more covetous. There was a kind of temptation that could be plucked by anyone. Lin Yi's eyes couldn't help but light up. This time, I almost lost my life when I helped you suck out the poison. I believe that you understand the dangers involved the most. Of course, the repayment is not lacking. Lin Yi paused. Looking at Hui Yuri's little heart thumped wildly, then said, So when the time comes, we have to change the way we split the Thunder Xian Vying. You get 20 and I get 80. You don't have any objections, right? You. Hui Yuri was dumbfounded. The nervousness and shyness in her heart disappeared in an instant. She thought that Lin Yi had seen something he shouldn't have seen under her skirt, and wanted to use this opportunity to make some unreasonable demands. After all, it was common for someone to repay a life-saving debt with their body. Hui Yuri had always been very confident in her looks, and it was because of this that she had to cover her face. Otherwise, men would chase after her like flies that couldn't be driven away, and there would be too many troubles. Under such circumstances, she naturally thought that Lin Yi would also make such a request, but she never expected that. This guy had been beating around the bush for half a day just to say this. Hui Yuri was both angry and amused at the same time. Looking at the serious Lin Yi, she was speechless for a long time. She really didn't know how to describe this feeling. If she was someone from the secular world, she might say, I've even taken off my pants, and you're showing me this? What about me? This is already a very small return, okay? Think about it, I saved your life. Is there a problem with that? Lin Yi said with a matter-of-fact expression. Hui Yuri didn't know why, but she was suddenly in a good mood, and the corners of her mouth curled up as she said, No, we agreed on 370. This is this. Then didn't I let you suck it for nothing? Lin Yi glanced at her. Anyway, I'm done. It's useless for you to go back on your word. 370 is 370. As for you detoxifying me, I can think of another way to repay you. Hui Yuti said with a proud smile. She didn't feel this way before, but now she felt that bickering with Lin Yi wasn't a bad thing. Hee hee. Are you burning the bridge after crossing the river? Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh, but his face still had a victorious expression. He said with a smile. It's a pity that you're burning the bridge a little too early. You haven't even completely crossed the river. Aren't you digging your own grave by burning the bridge now? What do you mean? Hui Yuti looked at Lin Yi's expression and couldn't help but twitch. It's very simple. Aren't you still so numb that you can't move? This means that the poison hasn't been completely sucked out. What I helped you just now was only some of the poison left on the surface. However, during this period of time, some of the poison has already been absorbed by you. It has already integrated into your body and is difficult to remove. So I estimate that in a few more hours the poison will enter your vitals. Lin Yi said with a faint smile. Ah? Hui Yuti was no longer in a good mood. She was instantly frightened by Lin Yi and was at a loss of what to do. She said with a face full of fear. Is this true or false? You're not lying to me? Whether it's true or false, won't you know after feeling it yourself? You should know better than me about this kind of thing. Take a look at how far the poison has developed in your body. If the poison has really been completely removed, why is your leg still unable to move? Lin Yi said indifferently. This? Hui Yuti didn't dare to be negligent. She carefully felt it according to Lin Yi's words and her heart sank. It was just as Lin Yi said, the poison that hadn't been sucked out had already integrated into her body through her blood. If it continued to develop, even the gods wouldn't be able to save her. How is it? Have you thought it through? Lin Yi crossed his arms and stood calmly at the side as he looked at her. That Kaisi was right. You really are a eunuch. Hui Yuti couldn't help but be a little angry. She pitifully blinked her eyes and pouted. I've already begged you so much, but you still want to take advantage of me. And it's this kind of advantage. What? Then do you want me not to be a eunuch and take advantage of you in other ways? Or do you want me to just… Lin Yi heard this and couldn't help but smile playfully. Hui Yuti was suddenly speechless. Only then did she realize the ambiguity in her words. Her pretty face blushed again. This time, even her veil was slightly reflected. She quickly buried her head in her chest and said in a muffled voice. Okay. 280 is 280. Quickly help me detoxify. That's more like it. It may be a little painful next. You have to bear with it. Lin Yi smiled and immediately knelt on the ground again. He put his mouth on the other party's wound. His mouth was originally numb, but now that he had rested for a while, it had completely recovered. Humph! Hui Yuti let out a low moan as she felt Lin Yi sucking on her lips. She blushed at her own reaction. Her legs were still numb, but she could more or less feel them now because of the large amount of toxins that had been expelled from her body. Chapter 4680. She didn't know what Lin Yi's reaction was, but Hui Yuti was already blushing. She let a man lie under her skirt and suck on her wound, and she couldn't help but let out such an ambiguous moan. What was going on? As a girl with a pure heart, Hui Yuti was obviously very sensitive to this aspect of shame. After letting out a subconscious moan, she immediately gritted her teeth and held it in. She couldn't let out a second moan even if she died. Otherwise, how could she face Lin Yi in the future? Just thinking about this kind of thing was embarrassing. However, after a short while, Hui Yuti's body suddenly trembled slightly, and she couldn't help but let out another moan. In fact, this couldn't be blamed on her. If Lin Yi was simply sucking on her wound, she could actually barely endure it. However, at this moment, there was suddenly a warm vital energy in her body. It flowed through her meridians, and every time it flowed, it would bring something from her body that shouldn't be there. It was the poison that the eight-legged tooth-claw worm had fused into her body. Not only was this feeling not painful at all, but it was also very warm and comfortable. In addition, as the poison decreased, the stimulation from Lin Yi's sucking on her wound became stronger. Hui Yuti couldn't help but feel like she was floating. When she came back to her senses, she felt that something was wrong with her whole body. What's wrong with me? Huyuri said in a daze as she resisted the comfortable and stimulating feeling that constantly attacked her scalp. However, this pitiful willpower was quickly shattered by the next wave of feeling. What was this girl thinking? Listening to Huyuri's faint moans, Linny couldn't help but be a little speechless. He had painstakingly sucked out the poison for her, and at the same time, he had to control the all-purpose vital energy to swim in her body. He thought this process would be more painful, but he didn't expect her to sound like she was enjoying it. Although he was speechless, Linny couldn't stop and say anything at this time. As long as Huyuri resisted and didn't move, he would let her do whatever she wanted. However, Linny soon felt that he had made a mistake because he found that Huyuri's moans didn't stop. On the contrary, it showed signs of becoming more and more frequent and intense. It was simply out of control. Listening to this seductive voice, even Linny couldn't help but feel a little restless in his heart. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Although this chick was a little straightforward when they first met, most of the time she still had the temperament of an iceberg snow lotus. He didn't expect her to be so open at this time. Little did he know that it was because of the poison. Huyuri couldn't control her feelings at all. As a master of the peak yawning stage, the powerful restraint was not useful at this moment. It was completely the instinctive reaction of the body. However, even though she couldn't control herself, Huyuri's mind was still very clear. She could clearly see all of her reactions. She was so embarrassed that if there was a crack on the ground, she would have already crawled into it. "Call me whatever you want. After I recover my ability to move, just don't kick me," Linny muttered in his heart. He immediately concentrated on using his all-purpose true chi to eradicate the last bit of poison. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to succeed, Huyuri suddenly cried out again. A warm current seemed to be uncontrollable. Lin Yi's position was simply unbiased, and he just happened to be drenched. This scene came too suddenly. Lin Yi was completely caught off guard, and his whole body was immediately stunned. He faintly felt that it was somewhat familiar. After thinking for a long time, he finally remembered. It was the same situation when he was treating the young Miss Poison in the past. He was simply drenched to death. Lin Yi stared blankly for a long time and didn't move. After a long time, he lowered his head with a speechless expression. He eliminated the last bit of poison in the other party's body and silently stood up. At this moment, Huyuri's whole body was already limp. Even though she knew that she had regained consciousness, she still curled up on the ground and didn't dare to move. She had an ashamed look on her face. Needless to say, this chick looked even more beautiful at this moment. Lin Yi suddenly shook his head speechlessly. He thought to himself, the one who was drenched just now was me. I haven't said anything yet, and you're still shy. However, to be honest, Lin Yi didn't have much resistance or dissatisfaction with this matter. He didn't have much resistance in his heart either. Anyway, he didn't smell any strange odor, and after all, she was a rare beauty. In his opinion, this matter was a loss that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But in the eyes of other men, it might be a dream, so he just endured it. The two of them were silent for a long time. Lin Yi helplessly waited at the side, but Huyuri buried her head like an ostrich and didn't move. It was almost midnight. How long was this chick going to be shy? However, at this time, if it was any other girl, they would be ashamed. Huyuri's reaction was normal. Lin Yi thought about it, and had to take the lead to break the silence. He comforted her. In fact, you don't have to be embarrassed. It's a natural reaction of the human body. I just gathered the poison absorbed from your body through the meridians and then used this method to expel it from your body. So it's expected. There's nothing to be shy about. These words were simply nonsense. It was just to find a justifiable excuse for Huyuri. In fact, it was not the case at all. The little bit of poison that her body had absorbed had already been crushed into powder by Lin Yi's 5 elements murderous aura. Compared to the original all-purpose chi, the 5 elements murderous aura had a more obvious healing effect. This was a new discovery that Lenny had just made during the process of curing the poison. In the past, except for people like Lenny who had the 5 elements physique, the 5 elements murderous aura was an extremely fatal existence for any cultivator. It was so fierce and overbearing that no one could withstand it. However, in the process of curing the poison, Lenny suddenly discovered that the 5 elements murderous aura's healing effect was far stronger than the all-purpose chi. More importantly, it also had the characteristics of the all-purpose chi. As long as he controlled it well, it would not cause any harm to the opponent. In the end, it could be absorbed by the opponent. Simply put, it was simply an upgraded version of the all-purpose chi. It was extremely overbearing when used to attack, and it was always successful when used to heal. This was the best description for the 5 elements murderous aura. This sudden and unexpected joy made Lenny rejoice. Being able to find the giant electric eel in the deep sea was simply a blessing that couldn't be cultivated for several lifetimes. The 5 elements murderous aura itself was an endless huge treasure. Lenny shrugged his shoulders at Huyuri, who was still lying on the ground. He had already paved the stairs for her. If she still didn't get up, then he really didn't know what to do. To be continued. Chapter 4681. In any case, he couldn't just lie down like this. Lenny didn't want to waste time on this kind of thing. Looking at Huyuri's limp appearance. To be honest, Lenny was also quite puzzled. He could understand the first few snorts, but why did it become like this in the end? Only God knew. He couldn't understand it himself. A voice popped up in Lenny's mind just as he was cursing Lenny. "You've probably made her high." Puff! Cough, cough, cough. When he was immersed in thinking, this suddenly happened. Lenny was almost scared crazy. He choked a few times before he could barely hold it in. He complained speechlessly. "Senior Ghost, you scared me to death." "How am I scared you? Didn't you say that only God knows? That's why I helped you analyze it." The ghost laughed strangely. There was even a hint of schadenfreude in its tone. Okay, but Senior, can you pay attention next time? Don't make me crazy. It's not good for you." Lenny shook his head helplessly. He paused and added, "Senior, your English is quite good. If I didn't know you were the former Azure Dragon, I would definitely fight with anyone who dared to say that you were a native of the Heavenly Stage Island. Hee, I can even learn the ancient language of you humans without a teacher, let alone this kind of bird language. Do you believe it?" the ghost said in a disapproving tone. Lenny was speechless again. The existence of this ghost was really unreasonable. In addition to the most instinctive fighting and killing, it even had such a terrible talent for this kind of thing. How could the students in the secular world endure this? Just as Lenny was communicating with the ghost, Huyuri seemed to understand Lenny's words just now. She reacted a little slowly. She blushed and whispered like a mosquito. "Really? You're not lying to me?" The reason why she was so shy was that she had been wondering whether she would be a king woman. No matter how innocent Huyuri was, she was still a nascent soul great circle expert. Moreover, she wasn't young at all. Although no one would mention this to her, she could still read books. Within the scripture depository of the Morning Pride Academy, there were all sorts of books, some of which were related to this aspect. There were also some very specialized books, specifically researching on how to dual cultivate with a man. After all, it was a female academy. There were bound to be some disciples who chose this path. It was also under such an atmosphere that Huyuri had once flipped through such books out of curiosity. Thus, she knew that some women would have such a reaction at that time. However, not all women would be like this. Only a small portion of them would be like this. She had always thought that she was very pure, so how could she be like this? If that was all, it would have been fine, but the problem was that she actually sprayed Lenny all over Lenny when he was treating her. How could he still have the face to go out and meet people, especially in front of Lenny? "No, what's in it for me to lie to you? Can you give me 10% more?" Lenny couldn't help but laugh in his heart. However, on the surface, he acted serious. Otherwise, he couldn't guarantee that this girl wouldn't be embarrassed to death. Right now, the most important thing was to hurry up and find the Thundershian vine. He didn't have so much time to waste. After hearing Lin Yi's answer, Hui Yuti immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Although she was still a little shy, she wasn't as ashamed as she was before. Since this was a normal detoxification process, it meant that it wasn't her problem. It meant that she wasn't the kind of woman described in the books. That was enough. Lin Yi's expression at this moment had a bit of a smile that wasn't a smile. In fact, it was only because he was communicating with the ghosts through his divine sense. However, in Hui Yuti's eyes, it naturally had a different meaning. This girl was so shy that she couldn't even lift her head. After finally finding a way out, she immediately blushed. Humph, it's all because of you. I'll deduct 10% from you. Let's make it 30-70. Hui Yuti mustered up her courage to look at Lin Yi and said angrily. This time, Lin Yi was completely speechless. What was wrong with this woman? He risked being buried with her to save her life, but in the end, she ate this little benefit back. Wasn't she turning hostile a little too fast? It seemed that the old saying was right. Only women and vile people were difficult to raise. What? Do you have an opinion? Hui Yuti saw Lin Yi's strange expression, and her pretty face blushed. She snorted and said, Let me tell you, if I tell others about today's matter, for the sake of my reputation, my master will definitely kill you. Huh! Lin Yi suddenly widened his eyes. He was just wondering why this girl suddenly became a little unruly. In the end, when he suddenly heard this sentence, he almost choked to death. This kind of thing could actually be used to threaten him. What kind of strange thinking was this? If she went out now, didn't she know that the one who would be the most humiliated would be herself? Or was it really as she said, that she had always been cultivating, and her mental age was far younger than ordinary people, so she didn't understand the basic ways of the world? Seeing that Lin Yi was stunned by her words, Hui Yuti's mouth curled up proudly. She finally got rid of the embarrassment from before. Her eyes curved into two delightful arcs, and she said with a proud smile, Now you have nothing to say, right? Humph, then it's decided happily. Hui Yuti was instantly in a good mood. These were the words that Lin Yi had used to mock her. Now, she could finally use them on Lin Yi. Giving him a taste of his own medicine, this kind of feeling was great. Hee, there's no use in going out. Who knows, it might even have the opposite effect. Lin Yi faintly smiled disapprovingly. What do you mean? Hui Yuti looked at Lin Yi suspiciously. You said it yourself? Your master and the deputy island master of Shanghai Tianhua are good friends. Since I'm his personal disciple, who knows, after your master hears about this, he might simply push the boat with the current and directly marry you to me as a cultivation companion. At that time, there's no medicine for regret. Lin Yi slightly raised his eyebrows and smiled. Humph! In your dreams! Hui Yuti's pretty face blushed slightly as she lightly spat. Her cheeks were once again filled with fiery clouds. The sensitive word, cultivation companion, caused her body to subconsciously go limp, and she instinctively recalled the embarrassing scene just now. Chapter 4682. Humph, you really know how to take advantage of the situation. If I give you a ladder, you can go to the sky, right? My master and deputy island master Shangguan are good friends, that's true, but you're deputy island master Shangguan's personal disciple. Hui Yuti had a look of disbelief on her face, but when she said this, she suddenly froze. Not to mention anything else, Lin Yi's previous intimate performance with Shanghai Lena was real, and although his realm was only at the peak of the early stage of nascent soul, it could be seen from the previous fight with the humanoid vine that his real strength was by no means so simple. At least, he was in existence that could fight against enemies of a higher level. In addition, he just treated her with a magical method. Each and every one of these things was not something that an ordinary disciple of the North Island could have. As the saying goes, a great teacher produces a great disciple. A person like Lin Yi, no matter how one looked at it, could not be taught by an ordinary cultivator. The person who could be his master must be an unfathomable big shot, and the person in the North Island who met this condition seemed to be Shanghai Tianhua. You can't really be? Hui Yudi couldn't help but change her expression, unable to hide her surprise, and asked. Almost. Lin Yi smiled indifferently. He did not intend to hide this kind of thing, nor did he intend to deceive Hui Yudi. Although there was no official master-disciple relationship, in fact, everyone in the 3 pavilions of the North Island, from top to bottom, had long regarded him as the personal disciple of Shanghai Tianhua. Even Shanghai Tianhua himself had a similar attitude, otherwise he would not pay so much attention to Lin Yi, and would not take the initiative to try to help Lin Yi. If Lin Yi announced to the public that he was his personal disciple, his attitude must be tacit, and maybe even fake it for real. Is this a prophecy of mine? Hui Yudi suddenly didn't know what to say. She had said this before to deal with Ren Zhongyuan and the others, but she did not expect it to be true. It was so strange. This word is not used to describe a good thing, right? Don't bully me because I'm uneducated. In any case, I went to university properly. Lin Yi corrected him with a straight face. These words were a little shameless. It was true that he was cultured, but that was all learned before he debuted. As for going to school, it was simply a pretense. It was pure nonsense. University? Oh, okay. Hui Yudi stared blankly for a moment, her eyes sizing up Lin Yi again, as if she wanted to see through all of his secrets. After a moment, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said, That's right. Since you and Shangguan Laner are so close, then she must be a good match that Deputy Island Master Shangguan has designated for you. Say, if she finds out that you've done something with other girls outside, will Shangguan Laner kill you out of anger? When she said this, Hui Yudi's tone was full of schadenfreude, as if she really felt that she had grasped hold of Lin Yi's weakness. After all, letting a direct disciple marry a descendant of a relative would make the relationship between the two parties closer and more reliable. This kind of thing could be seen everywhere on the Heaven Stage Island. Shangguan Laner was the pearl of Shangguan Tianhua. If she wanted to get married, the other party would either be a nephew of some super big shot, or a direct disciple of Shangguan Tianhua. There was no third choice. And this Lin Yi, although he was quite irritating at times, it was undeniable that this person was extremely outstanding in all aspects. However, it was undeniable that this person was extremely outstanding in all aspects. He was indeed a rare, 1-in-a-million match. The pavilion closest to the water enjoys moonlight first. Shangguan Tianhua would definitely not let him marry another woman. No way, why would you want to kill me? Lin Yi didn't know what was going on. Why not? Absolutely, this is the most basic common sense. Which woman is willing to let her husband be with another woman, not to mention Shangguan Laner, the little princess of the North Island? Hui Yudi said with a face of certainty. Then do you know why I specifically came to participate in this low-level broken trial? Lin Yi smiled at Hui Yudi's determined gaze. Low-level? Broken trial? Hui Yudi was a little stunned. The West Island trial was ranked among the top 5 Heaven Stage islands, and the strength of this trial was generally at the nascent soul stage. Before, the dummy vine had already made them, the masters of the nascent soul stage, extremely embarrassed, and this was still a low-level broken trial? Of course, I can kill all the people here at will. Do I have nothing better to do? Why would I come to such a place to waste time? Although Lin Yi's tone was a little joking, there was no exaggeration in his words at all. This West Island trial was really not difficult for him. With Lin Yi's strength, the most suitable and valuable trial for him should at least be a dangerous place open to the masters of the profound ascending stage. There was no pressure at all now. It was simply whimsical to want to have a big harvest. If he could successfully get the Thunder Xian vine this time, he would be satisfied. As for breaking through in strength, he didn't even think about it. Hui Yudi couldn't help but roll her eyes at Lin Yi when she heard this. This tone was really big, and it sounded like a joke, but through all the previous things, she faintly felt that there was a little possibility. This guy was really unfathomable. She couldn't help but ask, Then what are you doing here? Because of Shangguan Laner, she said she didn't want her best friend to marry others, so I can only reluctantly do it. Lin Yi shrugged with a smile. Best friend? Who is her best friend? Hui Yuti didn't respond for a while, and then suddenly remembered. She patted her head and said, Ning Xuefei? For most male cultivators, the main purpose of this West Island trial was not the treasures of heaven and earth, but to compete for the princess of West Island. However, she was a girl, so she didn't take this matter to heart from beginning to end. Until now, she suddenly remembered there was such a thing. Yes, who else could it be? Lin Yi smiled. Damn. Hui Yuti's eyes became more and more strange. She looked up and down at Lin Yi again, which almost made Lin Yi mad. Then she said faintly, Isn't it said that only those very powerful people can have 3 wives and 4 concubines? What's more, Ning Xuefei is the princess of West Island. Even if a man marries her, she must be the master. Can he marry other women? Won't the people of West Island go crazy? Am I not powerful? Lin Yi replied half-jokingly. As for the second question, he directly ignored it. Although this was indeed a very tricky problem, as long as he was strong enough, everything could be solved. Chapter 4683. Not the so-called people of West Island. Since Shanghai Tianhua could see Lin Yi's potential, so could Ning Shangling. As long as she knew that Lin Yi could become the reliance of the whole West Island one day, then nothing would be a problem. Humph, I really don't know where your confidence comes from. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I won't deduct your share, okay? Hurry up, Hui Yuti said as she slowly got up from the ground. After being paralyzed for such a long time, Hui Yuti's body was somewhat not used to it. She staggered before standing firm, but fortunately, Lin Yi was standing next to her. He reached out and held her in his arms. Hui Yuti let out a low cry and subconsciously held Lin Yi's arm, then fell into his arms. With the soft and fragrant body in his arms, Lin Yi raised his eyebrows subconsciously, and the corners of his mouth curved into a playful smile. Apart from other things, this girl's body was quite elastic. Ah! Hui Yuti suddenly screamed and hurriedly escaped from Lin Yi's arms. She blushed and didn't dare to look at him. She lowered her head and walked forward desperately. Hey, be careful. Don't be bitten by some weird things like 8-legged tooth clasp worm again. Seeing this, Lin Yi hurriedly chased after her. It was midnight now, and he could only distinguish the scene by the faint starlight above his head. Besides, he was in such a dangerous place. He was fine, but it was still very dangerous for Hui Yuti. Hui Yuti hurriedly slowed down, but she still didn't dare to look back at Lin Yi. She was so shy not purely because she was hugged by Lin Yi, but because the smell of the man just now made her body a little soft instinctively. Subconsciously, the previous scene appeared in her mind. Although Lin Yi said it was a normal process of detoxification. But she was always a little worried that she would do it again. If so, she would really be ashamed to see others. What the hell is this girl doing? Behind him, Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. He had no choice but to quickly chase after them. At the same time, he deliberately spread out his divine sense in case something like this happened again. If this happened a few more times, time would be wasted. Hui Yuti lowered her head and didn't say a word. After that, Lin Yi didn't know what to say, so he simply kept his mouth shut. As a result, the atmosphere became somewhat ambiguous in the silence. Lin Yi was still all right. At most, he could only admire this girl's graceful back view from behind. However, Hui Yuti had obviously become somewhat reserved and unnatural. For some unknown reason. In her mind, the scene of Lin Yi lying on top of her unconsciously surfaced, especially the most embarrassing scene. Hui Yuti felt as if her whole body was on fire when she thought about it. She even felt as if her ears were about to be burned off. It was too embarrassing. Although this matter was only between her and Lin Yi from beginning to end, and no one else would know, and there was an absolutely legitimate reason for detoxification, but even so. This also made Hui Yuti, who was an iceberg snow lotus in everyone's eyes, very embarrassed. It was precisely because of this that Yudi no longer felt confident even when facing Lin Yi. Her speech was also not as free and unrestrained as before. Instead, it was replaced by a bashful and shy attitude. Even she herself was very unfamiliar with this kind of attitude of a little girl. This kind of thing was simply unimaginable in the past. She was a snow lotus on a mountain of ice. Any man, no matter how outstanding, would fall for her. Any man in front of her, no matter how outstanding, would be involuntarily attracted to her, and she would only disdain them. How could it be like now, where her mind was filled with the shadow of a man? The two of them walked in this strange silence. Lin Yi didn't say anything about this. Putting himself in her shoes, it was normal for a girl like Yudi to be so shy when encountering this kind of thing. Only shameless women like Murongjin or Situchen would treat this kind of thing as a common occurrence. It was just that the silence along the way was really depressing to the point of making people uncomfortable. In reality, it wasn't only Lin Yi who felt this way. Yudi's desire to break this strange silence was even greater than his. Otherwise, she would really be immersed in her shyness and embarrass herself to death. Unfortunately, she really couldn't think of any topic at the moment. At this moment, there was even an inexplicable hope in the depths of her heart that Lin Yi would be able to stir up some small topics that the two of them could argue about. This was because not only would that solve this awkward and depressing atmosphere, but she also felt that it was actually quite interesting to have a little argument with this fellow Lin Yi. However, this was just Yudi's thoughts. After all, she and Lin Yi had only met for the first time. It couldn't be said that they truly understood each other. Especially in this kind of awkward atmosphere, whether it was her or Lin Yi, it was very difficult to find a suitable topic to divert their attention. Ambiguity would ferment, especially in this kind of awkward atmosphere. The feeling of ambiguity would constantly attack the depths of the mind. This was a normal person's natural yearning for beautiful things. Unless one's heart was dead, the mind would naturally think in this direction. Just like the current Yudi, she simply felt that she couldn't extricate herself. Every once in a while, Yudi would think of ways to sneak a glance at Lin Yi. Then, she would immediately turn her head back like a thief. It was a pity that her actions, which she thought was not a trace, were clearly seen by Lin Yi. He couldn't help but laugh. This girl was actually quite interesting. Along the way, the two of them walked like this for the whole night. It was different from the expected danger. This night's journey was not as dangerous as Lin Yi had imagined. After all, according to reason, many monsters were nocturnal, and the night was the most dangerous time. However, in reality, it was the opposite. This night, they did not encounter any accidents. Lin Yi couldn't help but guess, could it be because this was a desert? The night was silent until it was almost dawn. Lin Yi, who was walking at the back, suddenly moved. Accompanied by a light dragon roar, a five elements murderous chi suddenly swept over the head of Yudi in front of him. Ah! Yudi suddenly exclaimed. She thought that Lin Yi was going to do something to her. She quickly turned her head to look at Lin Yi. For some reason, she didn't know why, but she said with a red face, "What are you doing? What do you mean I'm doing?" Lin Yi looked at her strangely and pointed in front of her. "Look for yourself. You are an expert at the peak of nascent soul stage. Can you walk a little more seriously?" Chapter 4684. Yudi suddenly felt a wave of fear when she thought about how this thing had unknowingly flown above her head without her even realizing it. She had seen the corpse of the eight-legged tooth crackworm before, and the deterrence that this thing gave off was even greater than the eight-legged tooth crackworm. However, at this moment, this thing had already been pierced through the middle of its body, and it was clearly dead. It was clearly the masterpiece of Lin Yi's five-element killing intent just now. "Thank you?" Yudi blushed again. This time, it wasn't because of the awkwardness from before, but because of her own carelessness. A true expert must always be on guard, and because of the distracting thoughts lingering in her mind, she had obviously thrown this rule of survival to the back of her mind. "You're welcome." Lin Yi smiled slightly. Ever since the eight-legged tooth crackworm incident, He had been using his divine sense to sense everything around him, so as not to repeat the same mistake. Moreover, Lin had also accepted Huiyuti as a teammate in his heart, and was not constantly on guard like before. The warning from the jade pendant naturally included her as a teammate. The two continued forward. After experiencing this shock, Huiyuti's state was finally a little more normal, and she became more cautious as she moved forward. Not long after, she suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" Lin couldn't help but ask curiously, thinking that they had encountered some danger. However, there was nothing strange in his divine sense, and the jade pendant didn't have any intention of warning them. "Something's wrong. I smell a familiar smell, and it's not far ahead." Huiyuti frowned. "A familiar smell?" Lin looked at her strangely. He then walked past her and said without looking back, "It's this way, you can just follow behind me. I'm not lying to you, I'm very sensitive to smell. There's definitely danger ahead," Huiyuti hurriedly shouted. "I didn't say that I don't believe you, but even if there's danger, we still have to move forward, right? We can't just give up halfway because of a little danger, right?" Lin waved his hand. As he spoke, he had already walked far away. Huiyuti clenched her teeth and hurriedly chased after him. Lin was right. Even if they knew that there was a tiger in the mountain, they still had to go there. It was impossible to obtain a heavenly treasure like the Thunder Xian vine without taking any risks. After walking for less than 300 feet, Lin suddenly felt a hint of alarm in his heart. At the same time, the jade pendant's warning sounded. He immediately shouted, "Retreat!" Just as Lin and Huiyuti retreated, dozens of thick vines burst out of the ground. It was the dummy vine again. "You have a good nose." Lin calmly glanced at Huiyuti. Because the dummy vine was hidden deep underground, even his divine sense could not detect it before it launched its attack. He did not expect that this little girl would be able to smell its scent from so far away. She had obviously only come into contact with it once. It was simply unimaginable. "I've always been talented in this area. And I've also gone through special training in order to be useful in some special occasions," Huiyuti replied. "Well, in those places where divine sense can't be used, your nose can really come in handy." Lin smiled slightly. "What do we do now?" Huiyuti looked at the dummy vine in front of her, and suddenly felt as if she was facing a great enemy. Although she had retreated in time under Lin Yi's reminder, the problem was that there was only one way. If they didn't get rid of this dummy vine, the Thunder Xian vine was simply an extravagant hope. Previously, she had joined forces with Ren Zhongyuan and the others to attack. The four of them at the nascent soul stage barely managed to kill the dummy vine, and all of them were injured. And now, the giant vines of the dummy vine in front of them looked even thicker and more terrifying than the previous one. However, only she and Lin Yi were left. The situation was not optimistic no matter how one looked at it. "There's nothing to do, just get rid of it," Lin Yi said as he dashed forward. The humanoid vines, hundreds of vines, started to dance in a frenzy, as if they were sharks that had smelled blood. They lashed out at Lin Yi with all their might. This frightening stance gave Huiyuti a huge fright. If it were her, she might have been turned into minced meat with just one hit. However, Lin Yi did not dodge it. His body suddenly surged with a monstrous heat, and his whole person suddenly seemed like a fire god descending to the world, shrouded in raging flames, making people unable to look directly at him. Even if it was a plant that had become a spirit, it was still a plant after all. The dummy vine was most afraid of fire. After discovering that it was not good, it wanted to escape in a flash. The giant vines that were dancing wildly retreated faster and faster, and the offensive and defensive momentum was inadvertently completely reversed. However, the dummy vine was still too late to escape. Lin Yi's frenzied fire fist suddenly shot out, hitting its most vital root. Accompanied by a burst of strange screams, the entire dummy vine was completely enveloped in flames. In just a short period of time, this behemoth that even a nascent soul stage master was helpless against was completely burned, leaving only ashes on the ground. Huiyuti looked at this scene dumbfounded, and her whole person was completely dumbfounded. She thought that with her and Lin Yi's strength, if they wanted to pass through here, they would have to fight a bloody battle. Maybe they would pay the price of serious injuries, but she did not expect that in such a short period of time, the dummy vine was so easily dealt with by Linny. "What are you still doing? Let's go!" Linny looked at her and said, "Ah? Oh!" Only then did Huyuri come back to her senses, and hurriedly followed the footsteps of Linny. This time, it was her turn to look at Linny's back, and she suddenly couldn't help but be a little lost in thought. Previously it was still a little vague, but this time, she really saw it. Such a powerful and terrifying dummy vine was easily killed in a second. Although Linny was at the peak of the early nascent soul stage, his real strength was far more powerful than an ordinary nascent soul stage master. In the Eastern Continent Academy, where geniuses came forth in large numbers, it was not strange to challenge someone of a higher level, but to surpass such an abnormal existence like Linny, even in the entire Eastern Continent Academy, it was simply a monster. What made Huyuri's imagination run wild was not simply because of Lin Yi's strong performance, but this feeling of hiding behind a man and being protected by him in battle made her feel a little strange. This was something that had never happened before. Not to mention that with her strength, she rarely encountered real danger, and even if she did encounter it, although there was someone like Renjong Yuan who repeatedly said that he would protect her, when it really came to a critical moment, he often couldn't even take care of himself, so how could he talk about protecting her? Only the current Lin Yi was truly protecting her. Chapter 4685. However, at least before she was poisoned and injured, Lin Yi didn't do anything in this regard at all. When he followed Renjong Yuan and the others, he was just a bystander. After they parted ways, Huyuri was also the one leading the way. All of these changes started after she was injured. Huyuri couldn't help but be a little lost in thought. If it wasn't for her injury, this guy would have been hiding behind and lazily picking up ready-made things. When there was nothing to do, he would just be a bystander. When there was a problem, he would stand up without hesitation. This guy was actually quite manly. But on second thought, Lin Yi might be afraid that he wouldn't be able to get the Thunder Xian vine if something happened to her, so he was so proactive and diligent. Huyuri suddenly shook her head with some worries. Apart from pure interest considerations, she didn't think that Lin Yi would like her. After all, from the beginning when they met, everything had been explained. Even if she wore a veil, other men's eyes would unconsciously light up when they saw her, but Lin Yi didn't. From the beginning to the end, he behaved very normally. Not only that, but when he asked for a share, he even extorted her. Especially when he used the opportunity to cure her poison, he didn't have the slightest intention of coveting her beauty. Instead, he asked for a share. Huyuri unconsciously let her imagination run wild. If it was another normal man who had such an ambiguous relationship with her, even if the Thunder Xian vine wasn't given to her, he would at least reverse the situation and let her take 80%. How could he be as stingy as Lin Yi? He didn't chase such a beautiful woman and only knew how to hold on to the Thunder Xian vine. If Lin Yi really was that kind of person, then she wouldn't be able to help him. From the beginning, he wouldn't have extorted her. Reverse the situation, my ass. For Huyuri's careful thoughts, Lin Yi didn't notice at all. The reason why he took the initiative to solve the problem was that he didn't want Huyuri to have an accident again, but this wasn't the main reason. The main problem was that time was limited. He really didn't want to waste too much time on the road. Huyuri was a nascent soul stage master. In theory, she could stay here for a full month, which was still plenty of time. But Lin Yi was different, although he was strong enough to kill a profound ascending stage master, but in terms of strength alone, he was only at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. Who knew how the teleportation formation was set up? If this thing was purely based on one's cultivation level, it would be very disadvantageous for Lin Yi. What if there was a delay on the road? If he was trapped here and couldn't get out, he would really be screwed to death. Since the limit of a Yuanying stage master was only 1 month, then the limit of a peak early Yuanying stage master was only half a month at most, or even 10 days was very likely. This time was extremely tight. If something happened on the way, it would be over. This time it was related to Ning Xuefei's lifelong event. Lin Yi did not want to end up in a tragedy. Therefore, he had no other choice. Along the way, he must cut the Gordian knot. If he could get rid of a roadblock like the humanoid vine in one move, then there would be no need for a second move. In this way, Hui Yuri, a nascent soul stage master, became his assistant. To be precise, she was purely a bystander. She didn't even have a chance to make a move. Generally, by the time she found a threat, Lin Yi would have already dealt with it in one move. Being sheltered under the arm of a mere peak early Yuanying stage master, if it was any other nascent soul stage master, they would feel awkward. At least they would lose face, but Hui Yuri didn't have such a thought. On the contrary, she felt that this feeling was very wonderful. It made her feel at ease from the bottom of her heart. Lin Yi swept through everything in front of him, and Hui Yuri followed behind him, letting her imagination run wild. She'd stop occasionally to confirm the direction and route they were taking. The two walked like this for half a day, and the sky was starting to darken again. Lin Yi suddenly stopped in his tracks, and stopped in his tracks. Bang! Hui Yuri didn't know what she was thinking at this time. She bumped into Lin Yi's body, causing Lin Yi to stagger. Only then did she react and suddenly blushed. Seeing Lin Yi turn his head, she rolled her eyes and quickly complained. "Why did you suddenly stop?" Lin Yi was speechless for a while. He looked at this chick and helplessly pointed to the front, but he didn't say much. Not to mention, with this chick's figure and elasticity, it was actually quite comfortable to be bumped from behind. "What? Is there danger again?" Hui Yuri muttered. Anyway, as long as she looked at Lin Yi's back along the way, she couldn't help but be distracted. She was already used to this kind of thing. In front of Lin Yi, her demeanor as a nascent soul stage master had long been thrown away. She didn't have any self-awareness at all. "It's not dangerous, but you have to wait for me here for a while. I have a friend who seems to be in some trouble." Lin Yi frowned slightly. "Your friend?" Hui Yuri was stunned when she heard this. She quickly spread out her divine sense to sense around. Only then did she find that there seemed to be a conflict between a few people in the distance. Among them were Lin Yi's friends. It wasn't too far away from where the two of them were, probably less than 2,000 feet away. At this moment, in a corner of a canyon, 3 men were surrounding a man and a woman. All of them had lewd and sinister smiles on their faces. "Ha ha, I'll say it again. Leave the treasures in this chick, then I can spare your life. If you don't know what's good for you, he." One of the men standing on the side of the 3 laughed incomparably lewdly. At the same time, the other 2 also laughed proudly. The 3 of them surrounded the man and woman from the left, center, and right. Behind them was the canyon cliff. Unless the man and woman could grow wings and fly, it would be a fool's dream to escape. Don't even think about it. This was the resolute voice of a man. He spread out his arms and tightly protected the woman behind him. Facing the 3 men, he said fearlessly, "Even if I, Qi Wenhan, die, I will not let you touch a single hair on my body." From afar, Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he heard this voice. This was really Qi Wenhan's personality. As the young master of the Heaven's Equal Escort Agency, he didn't have the air of a spoiled brat. Instead, he was as resolute and courageous as a Jianghu hero. He had the temperament of a chivalrous hero. Since it was Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo who were in trouble, Lin Yi originally wanted to rush over to help them. However, after hearing the words of these people, his footsteps immediately slowed down. Chapter 4686. If he wanted to warm up the relationship between the two of them, simply being alone was not enough. Perhaps they would not be able to break through this layer of window paper until the end of the trial. The best way was to give them an opportunity, and right now, it was a heaven-sent opportunity. The trick of a hero saving the beauty had been used too many times in the secular world. In order to win the beauty's heart, those plebeians had to create their own opportunities even if they didn't have the opportunity. They asked people to pretend to be hooligans to set off their glorious image. This trick was so common that it was not new at all. If he didn't know Chi Wen-hun's character, Lin Yi even couldn't help but wonder if these three guys were actors he deliberately hired with spiritual jades. After all, the timing of their appearance was simply perfect. Boy, are you stupid? If you weren't the young master of South Continent's Equal Heaven Escort Agency, Masterine would have killed you long ago. How dare you be so stubborn in front of us? With such a poor strength, how can you be a hero? The other man with the ugly head and rat eyes sneered. That's right, you dare to be a hero in front of us. How many brains do you have? Or do you have no brains at all? Don't you look at the comparison of strength? You are just at the peak of the early stage of nascent soul realm and one at the early stage of nascent soul realm, and you want to fight against our Masterine. I'm surprised. Who gave you the courage and courage? The previous man kept talking and ridiculed them. I say, haven't you figured out the situation yet? Our Masterine is the core disciple of Snow Sword Sect in the Middle Island, a real master at the peak of nascent soul realm. Do you understand what this means? This means that now in this West Island trial, our young Masterine is the strongest one. Now I don't have to waste my breath on what to do, right? The man with the ugly head and rat-like eyes had a complacent expression on his face. Snow Sword Sect? Lin Yi, who was walking over slowly, was stunned when he heard this word. He secretly thought that things in this world were really coincidental. Fortunately, this guy was not Wei Xinjin. Otherwise, today's thing would be really interesting. Well, have you thought about it? The man in the middle of the three, who was called Masterine, said. At first glance, this man looked a bit like a master. He was also handsome, but there was always a bit of evil in his eyes. He always gave people a feeling that he was not above board. Humph, do I even need to think about this? I'll say it again, if you dare to touch a hair on Lolo's head, I won't rest until you die today. Chi Wen-hun narrowed his eyes and stared at young Masterine. This person was the biggest threat. After all, he was an expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm. Just him alone was not something that he and Xia Luoluo could deal with. TSK, it sounds like you have some backbone. It's a pity that his brain isn't that good. Young Masterine didn't even look at Chi Wen-hun as he stared unscrupulously at Xia Luoluo. He was a veteran who had seen countless women. Naturally, he could tell that Xia Luoluo's current appearance was a disguise. Just from her temperament, he could tell that this woman was definitely a rare beauty. Xia Luoluo was scared by his stare, and she quickly hid behind Chi Wen-hun. Although she was stronger than Chi Wen-hun, women were always naturally weaker at this time. Fortunately, Chi Wen-hun's performance gave her some comfort. Thanks to these three people, she felt a little hazy in her heart. It was starting to sprout. Young Masterine also poked his head out and looked greedily at the hiding Xia Luoluo. He smacked his lips as if he was tasting a rare toy. He said to the unyielding Chi Wen-hun, Brat, give this girl to me. At most, I'll just play with her. I won't kill her. This way, it'll be good for you, me, and her. Otherwise, she can only be buried with your boring man's pride. Think carefully about which is more important. Chi Wen-hun was originally very resolute, but after hearing these words, his heart subconsciously wavered. He knew that with his strength, he couldn't protect Xia Luoluo. It didn't matter if he died here, but if he dragged Xia Luoluo to die with him, that wouldn't be justifiable. However, Chi Wen-hun turned his head and looked at Xia Luoluo. After understanding the meaning of the other's gaze, his wavering immediately disappeared. Xia Luoluo had expressed it very clearly. She would rather die than be given to this bastard. Since that was the case, what was there to hesitate about? Humph, I've thought it through very clearly. If you want to touch even a strand of my hair, you'll have to do it over my dead body. Chi Wen-hun paused, and suddenly his blood surged as he roared. Come! This sound was like a clap of thunder that came out of nowhere. Even the clouds in the sky were shaken a bit. As for the three people who were close to Chi Pai, they were even more shocked. Each of their expressions changed greatly, and they took several steps back. Xia Luoluo's gaze stared straight at Chi Wen-hun from behind. Her eyes flickered with a peculiar light. She was also shocked, but she was pleasantly surprised. An intense warmth immediately surged from the bottom of her heart. At this moment, the gaze she looked at Chi Wan with became even more tender and sweet. She didn't have this kind of opportunity in the past, so even if she had a good impression of Chi Wan, it was only a good impression. She wasn't sure that this was the man she could entrust her life to. But now, she was sure that although the situation was dangerous, there was a lover who was willing to die for her. What else could she ask for in this life? Chi Wan didn't notice Xia Luoluo's tender and sweet gaze behind him. He only stared at the three people in front of him. In particular, he stared at young Master Yin. Looking at their expressions, he knew that these people were already angry out of humiliation. Next, there would be a bloody battle to the death. He probably wouldn't survive today, but no matter what, he had to at least give Xia Luoluo a chance to escape. No matter what, he couldn't let her fall into the hands of these beasts. "Oh, I didn't expect you to be such a tough guy. I really admire you a little now." After being shocked, young Master Yin didn't immediately launch an attack like Chi Wan had imagined. Instead, he still looked like a cat playing with a mouse. However, he didn't want Chi Wan to take the initiative to retreat like before. He looked at Chi Wan as if he was looking at a dead man. He admired tough guys, but if it was a tough guy who went against him, it was better to kill him. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble in the future. Haha, he's indeed a tough guy. Unfortunately, tough guys don't have a good ending, especially tough guys who go against our young Master Yin. The ugly guy echoed with a laugh. That's right. Our young Master Yin is being merciful and wants to spare your life, but you don't even appreciate it. There are so many brainless idiots in this world, especially this kind. They're so stupid that they want to cry. The other person also mocked. Chapter 4687. Young Master Yin seemed to enjoy the feeling of a cat playing with a mouse. Holding his arms and pinching his chin, he said, "Tut tut, I have to say that this girl is really the best. Even if she disguises herself, she can't hide her natural beauty. I'm so lucky." Speaking of this, the opportunity to come to West Island should have belonged to Wei Xinjin, the big idiot, but that idiot had to wander around Tiandan Pavilion every day. What AF * king idiot! Hee, if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have met such a wonderful girl. It's really God's will, ha ha ha. That's right, young Master Yin. Wei Xinjin is just at the early stage of Yuanying realm. He was valued by the senior management of the sect only because he got acquainted with the will of heaven. How dare he compare with our young Master Yin? The ugly guy flattered. Yes, let's take this opportunity to win glory for Middle Island. As long as young Master Yin wins the Princess of West Island, you will have a meteoric rise. Moreover, Deputy Island Owner Chu will also treat us differently. That bullshit Wei Xinjin doesn't even deserve to carry shoes for our young Master Yin. The other guy also flattered, unwilling to be left behind. You two have hit the nail on the head. If I become rich this time, I won't forget your benefits. Young Master Yin laughed happily. Although he was very powerful, he didn't have any strong backing in the school. So, he hadn't been very successful. Especially in the past 2 years, even Wei Xinjin had become a core disciple of the school. This was something that made him unhappy no matter how he looked at it. This time, he could use this rare opportunity to make a name for himself in one fell swoop. At that time, he would like to see how those snobbish people of the Snow Sword School would react. Of course, even if he, young Master Yin, was not successful in the Snow Sword School, he was still a high and mighty core disciple. As for the *T South Continent escort agency behind Chi Wan, he did not care about it at all. It was just a small, unranked force. Perhaps there were people in the South Continent Sea who would take it seriously, but how could it compare to a large sect like the Middle Island? There was no comparison between them at all, so even if he killed Chi Wan here, there wouldn't be any repercussions. Putting aside the fact that he could kill people to silence them, even if the news leaked out, would the damned South State Escort Agency dare to go to Middle Island to seek revenge? young Masterine said as he walked towards Chiwahan and Xia Luoluo. There was a lascivious smile on his face. In his eyes there was only a beauty in disguise. As for the rotten egg in front of him, he could casually squash it to death with one hand. He didn't even bother to look at it. Chiwahan gritted his teeth. Just as he was about to attack recklessly, Xia Luoluo suddenly rushed out from behind and shielded him behind her. She gritted her teeth at the approaching young Masterine and said, "If you dare to do anything to me, I'd rather die than live in disgrace." Surprised, Chiwahan looked at Xia Luoluo's back, and his eyes couldn't help but redden. He didn't even have time to feel touched, and hurriedly rushed to protect her behind him, yelling, "If you have any problems, come at me!" Ha 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 ha, what a good saying. Interesting, this is too interesting. I like to break up lovers, it's only satisfying this way. Young Masterine sneered unscrupulously. A mere peakerly nascent soul cultivator has the nerve to say this to me? You'd rather die than live in disgrace? What a big joke. I think it should be called die in disgrace. I'll be fine even if you're broken. After saying that, young Master Yin's aura of a perfected nascent soul cultivator enveloped Chiwahan and Xia Luoluo without reservation. Under the strong pressure, the two's hearts tightened at the same time. They were afraid that today was really going to be dangerous. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly interrupted. So what if you're at the peakerly nascent soul? Are you looking down on me? Along with the voice, Lin Yi appeared in front of everyone with a cold expression. Hui Yudi, who was following behind him, couldn't help but feel nervous. She knew that Lin Yi's strength couldn't be measured with common sense. She also knew that this man and woman were Lin Yi's friends, so Lin Yi would definitely stand up for them. However, if it really came to this point, it wouldn't be so easy to end things, because the strength of the three opponents was really not weak. Not to mention that young Master Yin in the middle was a perfected nascent soul cultivator. Even the two followers next to him were perfected nascent soul cultivators. Facing this kind of strength, these two friends of Lin Yi couldn't do anything at all, and even if Lin Yi could fight opponents who were at a higher level than him, his strength was only at the peak early nascent soul stage. Could he be a match for these three people? Hui Yudi even felt that even if she joined the battle, she might not be able to gain an advantage against these three people, because at that time, not only would Lin Yi's two friends not be of help, but they would also become a burden. The consequences were really unpredictable. Chiwahan, who'd been prepared to die, was overjoyed when he saw Lin Yi's sudden appearance. There was finally hope for him. Oh? Here comes another weakling who isn't afraid of death. What kind of day is it today? Why do useless things dare to come and play the hero? Young Master Yin glanced at Lin Yi with extreme contempt. When he saw Hui Yudi, his eyes immediately lit up. Another rare great beauty. Xia Luoluo's appearance was not very clear because of her disguise, but this Hui Yudi was different. Even if she wore a veil, it couldn't hide her heavenly beauty, especially that exquisite and curvaceous body. This was a stunning beauty that no man would be able to resist when they saw her. You're from the Snow Sword faction? Lin Yi looked at the three people and asked young Master Yin, who was in the middle, with the corner of his mouth slightly raised. That's right. Young Master Yin was stunned for a moment, and then he said proudly, If you know what's good for you, hurry up and scram. Don't cause trouble for your own faction. You can't afford to offend them. Is that so? Lin Yi smiled noncommittally, and instead of answering, he asked, From what you said just now, it seems like Wei Xingjin is your enemy. Oh? Young Master Yin couldn't help but be stunned again. He couldn't help but glance at Lin Yi suspiciously. Could it be that this brat knew that idiot Wei Xingjin? But no matter what, he clearly had no reason to act cowardly in front of such a nameless brat. Immediately he raised his head proudly and said, So what if I am? And where did you come from? Oh, nothing much. I'm just sorry to tell you that you can go die now. Lin Yi smiled lightly. In an instant, everyone was stunned. Chapter 4688. Among the crowd, Only Qi Wuhan had a matter-of-fact expression on his face. After experiencing so many things in the past, he would never doubt Lin Yi's strength. Although the other side had a peak nascent soul stage and 2 late nascent soul stage cultivators, and the lineup looked a bit fierce. But so what? F***CK. Why am I so unlucky today? Why did I run into these idiots? Young Master Yin cursed with a grin. Immediately, his killing intent soared and he was about to attack Lin Yi. However, before he could mobilize the true qi in his body, he heard a soft dragon roar next to his ear. Immediately after, he saw a dragon-shaped killing intent penetrate his chest without any resistance. He fell to the ground in a daze, and died with his eyes wide open. F***CK. The whole scene was dead silent. This scene happened too quickly and too suddenly. Young Master Yin's 2 followers were completely dumbfounded, and they were so shocked that they could not close their mouths for a long time. Just a moment ago, they thought that this idiot who came out of nowhere was seeking his own death. His strength was not enough, but his tone was quite arrogant. They thought that young Master Yin would definitely trample him to death. In the blink of an eye, young Master Yin, a peak nascent soul stage cultivator, became a corpse. And he died so miserably and so easily. Was this guy even human? The 2 looked at Lin Yi, who was still calm and collected, and were immediately scared to the point of wetting their pants. Didn't they say that only peak nascent soul stage cultivators could enter this place? Why did such a fierce monster suddenly appear? Don't come over! We are from the Snow Sword faction. If you dare to kill us, the Snow Sword School will never let you off! The 2 of them put on a brave front. They shouted hysterically as they backed away in fear. Didn't I just confirm that you are from the Snow Sword faction? You've already killed him, so why are you still talking to me about this? Lin Yi smiled faintly and glanced at the 2 of them indifferently. Do you know what I would do if I were you? What? The 2 of them looked at each other and answered subconsciously with fear. Turn around and run! At this time, you still dare to talk nonsense here, then go die with him! At the same time Lin Yi's voice fell. The silhouette suddenly disappeared into thin air. An instant later, it suddenly appeared on top of the 2 people's heads. With a kick from each person, the 2 people were kicked into the ground. 2 more corpses died with their eyes wide open. Hu Yudi stared blankly at the scene in front of her. She rubbed her eyes with all her might, afraid that this was an illusion. A master of the Great Yuanying stage and 2 masters of the Late Yuanying stage were so easily killed by Lin Yi. From beginning to end, there was no resistance at all. Was this guy really at the peak of the early Yuanying stage? Are you sure he's not at the peak of Mysterious Ascension early stage? He shook his head speechlessly. Hu Yudi looked at Lin Yi again with an inexplicable look in her eyes. Although Lin Yi had shown great strength along the way, and could even kill the dummy vine in a second, but to be honest, in Hu Yudi's opinion, no matter how strong Lin Yi was, he was at most similar to her. No matter how strong a master of the early Yuanying stage was, it was impossible to be stronger than a master of the Great Yuanying stage. This was common sense. As for why Lin Yi could kill the dummy vine in a second, the explanation was very simple. Plants were originally extremely afraid of fire, and it was also in this dry and hot environment. His fire attribute martial skill was bound to be twice the result with half the effort in this kind of situation. Hu Yudi felt that if she was also a fire attribute master, dealing with the dummy vine would definitely not be a problem. But now, they could only watch as Lin Yi killed the 3 of them with ease. Hu Yudi finally understood that her previous thinking was really too wrong. A person like Lin Yi was simply above the existence of common sense. A super genius who could surpass several realms and defeat an enemy of a higher level was originally just a legend. Even in the East Continent Academy, where geniuses gathered, it was impossible to find such a person. But now, this legend was standing right in front of her. Her heart was full of perilous waves. Hu Yudi finally realized why Lin Yi had been so indifferent along the way when he was following Ren Zhongyuan and the others. It turned out that this guy killed a master of the Great Yuanying stage like it was child's play. Ren Zhongyuan and the others still had the attitude of a high and mighty master, But in fact, they were simply being watched by others. What kind of ruthless person was this? Hui Yuti stared blankly at Lin Yi, and her mind couldn't help but start to let her imagination run wild. I don't know if this guy will kill me at the sight of the thunder mystic vine when he really finds it. That way, he doesn't even need to share 20% and can directly swallow it all for himself. Hui Yuti was dumbfounded. At this moment, Xia Luoluo, who was being protected by Qi Wenhan, also widened her eyes. She looked at the calm Lin Yi with a face full of astonishment. In fact, the matter of Lin Yi had long been a hot topic in the South Continent Sea, and Qi Wenhan had mentioned it to her many times. But hearing it from others was one thing, and seeing it with her own eyes was another. Previously, even if Xia Luoluo was beaten to death, she would never have imagined that the honorary escort chief that Qi Wenhan spoke of would be so terrifyingly powerful. The Heaven's Equal Escort Agency actually had such a powerful backer. A master at the peak of the early Yuanying stage was nothing, but a master at the peak of the early Yuanying stage who could instantly kill a master of the great Yuanying stage was a completely different concept. Even if she used her toes to think, as long as this person didn't die prematurely, he would definitely grow to become a top existence in the 5 great heavenly islands in the future. There was no doubt about this. Xia Luoluo couldn't help but remind herself that when she returned this time, she would have to properly explain today's matter to her father. Originally, she was a little afraid that her father wouldn't agree to the relationship between her and Qi Wenhan. But now, after seeing Lin Yi's shocking performance, she suddenly didn't have the slightest bit of worry. As the helmsman of the treasured ship transportation company, her father's foresight was naturally not inferior to hers. As the saying goes, when a man achieves the Tao, his chickens and dogs also rise to the heavens. Qi Wenhan's background and strength weren't weak, and now he had a powerful external aid like Lin Yi, who could casually give him a nascent soul golden pill. His strength was even more frightening. No one would refuse such a person, let alone a businessman with a unique foresight like her father. Looks like Brother Ling owed me a lot of things in your previous life. In this life, you've actually come to help me repay my debt. Qi Wenhan laughed heartily as he stepped forward and gave Lin Yi a bear hug. Lin Yi's awesomeness had long been deeply ingrained in his heart. Even the West Mountain Old Sect master of the evil cultivation period couldn't do anything to this brother of his, let alone a mere master of the great Yuanying stage. Chapter 4689. Although he had lowered his voice, he did not deliberately isolate it. When these words reached Xia Luoluo's ears, she immediately blushed. Even Qi Wenhan, a forthright man, unconsciously became a little bashful. Their eyes met, but they could not help but look at each other. This feeling of being a thief really made Lin Yi laugh. Even an outsider like Lin Yi could see that compared to the time when they first entered the trial, the relationship between Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo was obviously a level closer. It was no longer just a little ambiguous. On this point alone, the Snow Sword School's young master Yin and his 2 followers really could not go unnoticed. However, Lin Yi did not intend to let these 3 heroes go. In any trial that did not forbid killing and seizing treasures was always the most basic rhythm. Although Lin Yi would not take the initiative to do this kind of shady business, but this kind of opportunity that was delivered to his door, he would not foolishly let it go. Taking advantage of Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo's gazes, Lin Yi went forward and turned over the bodies of the 3 people, carefully searching them from top to bottom. When all the things were cleared out, he could not help but secretly curse the poor bastard. What the hell was on their bodies? It was simply a pile of garbage. Looking at the spoils of war that Lin Yi constantly plundered from the bodies of the 3 people, Hui Yuti, who had nothing to do, could not help but swallow her saliva. These 3 people were experts at the peak of Yuanying stage and late Yuanying stage. Who would carry garbage on their bodies? Although these things were not treasures, even in Hui Yuti's eyes they were quite good. Unfortunately, in the eyes of Lin Yi, these things were really worthless. He was in a primitive place like the Lufeng forest, and directly swept away a lot of heavenly materials and earthly treasures like a lawnmower. At the same time, he also plundered so many good things from so many people. What entered his eyes were all rare treasures such as infant ginseng, myriad crossing golden dan fruit, and star ink milk. Unknowingly, his eyes had been trained, so he did not look at these things. Brother Chi, these 3 people are your fortune. These 3 people are your good fortune, so the things that came to you will naturally belong to you. Take these and put them away. After Lin Yi finished looting, he waved his hand and gave everything to Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo on the spot. He didn't keep anything for himself. Of course, to be more precise, he didn't like any of them. Previously, he could even casually take out something like the nascent soul golden pill, so it was not surprising that Lin Yi would say such a thing. Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo looked at each other and couldn't help but feel a little happy. After all, these things were already quite good for them. No matter what, the strength of the 3 people was obvious. The things found on their bodies were treasures for the early Yuanying stage masters, except for a freak like Lin Yi. Hui Yudi pouted when she heard that. Lin Yi was so stingy when he was talking to her about splitting the profits, as if he couldn't wait to explode on her body. Why was he so generous to his 2 friends now? Among the treasures that they had plundered, there were quite a few rare things that were actually given away so easily. She still wanted them. It was just that Lin Yi had done this now. She was also too embarrassed to speak. Qi Wenhan looked at Hui Yudi, who wanted to say something but stopped. Lin Yi was generous, and as a brother, he accepted the things with a clear conscience. But he couldn't ignore the feelings of others, especially a beauty like Hui Yudi who was by Lin Yi's side. Even if he couldn't help much at the moment, he definitely couldn't become Lin Yi's pig teammate. This must be sister-in-law's wife, right? Qi Wenhan greeted Hui Yudi with a smile. Without waiting for Hui Yudi to explain, he divided the spoils that Lin Yi had plundered into 2. One was for him and Xia Luoluo, and the other was naturally for Hui Yudi. He smiled and said, "Everyone who saw it has a share. These are all gifts from Brother Ling, let's divide them together." "Ah? I don't want it." Hui Yudi's face instantly turned red. She actually forgot to refute the previous sentence, and could only hurriedly wave her hands. She quickly retreated behind Lin Yi. "You want it?" Lin Yi finally saw through Hui Yudi's thoughts, and couldn't help but be a little surprised. He thought that with Hui Yudi's strength and experience, she shouldn't be much lower than him, and wouldn't be interested in these people's things. Little did he know that he was purely judging others by his own standards, and thought that everyone was like him, having one fortuitous encounter after another. Seeing Lin Yi's gaze fall on her face, Hui Yudi couldn't help but feel a little flustered and nervous. She lowered her head, not daring to meet his gaze, and didn't know what to say for a moment. "Then you choose a few," Lin Yi said indifferently. As for Qi Wenhan's suggestion of splitting the spoils in half, there was no need. Firstly, he and Xia Luoluo couldn't just split it in half. Moreover, with Hui Yudi's experience, she wouldn't want many of the things here, and would at most choose a few. "Forget it." Hui Yudi shook her head and said softly. "Oh, then forget it." Lin Yi had a face of indifference. Hui Yudi stared at Lin Yi with all her might, and was immediately angered to death by him. "I'm a girl, and I'm just being shy to decline, that's all. As a man, can't you ask once more? If you ask once more, I can just push the boat with the current and accept it, really." Although he couldn't see the expression under the veil, Lin Yi could more or less see what this little girl was thinking through her eyes. He couldn't help but smile. "What do you want? I'll give it to you again. This is nothing." If it was anyone else who said such big words, Hui Yudi would definitely scoff at it. However, since it was Lin Yi, it was completely different. At the very least, the strength that Lin Yi had displayed was indeed worthy of this promise. Hui Yudi looked at Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo, and whispered to Lin Yi with a red face. "There are supplementary materials for refining that elixir. Although they aren't very rare, they aren't very easy to find." Even though she knew that Lin Yi and Qi Wenhan were very familiar with each other, she was still very cautious and didn't mention keywords like the Thunder Xian pill and the Thunder Xian vine. After all, this matter was of great importance. If it was accidentally leaked out and people knew that there was a Thunder Xian vine in this place, all kinds of problems would inevitably arise midway, and it might even lead to a failure at the final step. Then, she would want to cry but have no tears. "Oh, you don't have to worry about this. I have all those things." Lin Yi smiled as if he had everything under control. From the first day he arrived at the Heavenly Stage Island, he had been working on building a reserve. After 2 years, it had already reached a considerable scale. Basically, all the supplementary materials for mainstream elixirs were all ready. At most, extremely rare treasures like the Thunder Xian vine needed to be obtained by chance. As for the rest, he didn't need to spend much effort. To be continued. Chapter 4690. I won't be courteous with you, Brother Ling. Then it would be impolite of us to refuse, hehe. Qi Wuhan saw that Lin Yi had already spoken, and did not continue to refuse. He knew Lin Yi's personality, and even more so, he knew Lin Yi's strength. This was indeed nothing in his eyes. Thank you, Brother Ling. Xia Luoluo blushed and walked over to meekly thank Lin Yi. Since Qi Wuhan called him Brother Ling, she could only follow suit and call him Brother Ling. Don't mention it, we're family after all. Lin Yi chuckled playfully, and Xia Luoluo blushed even more. She hurriedly ran over to Qi Wenhan's side to collect the things, but did not refute him. This meant that she had already begun to accept this way of thinking from the bottom of her heart. Seeing that Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo had collected all the things, and after confirming that there were no other threats in the surroundings, Lin Yi finally said his goodbyes. All right, I won't disturb the two of you anymore. We're leaving. Oh, thank you, Brother Ling. Be careful on the road, we'll have a good drink when we get back. Qi Wenhan nodded, and at the same time, he could not help but look at Xia Luoluo. However, their gazes instantly parted as if they had been electrocuted. At this moment, their minds were filled with Lin Yi's words, a world of the two of them. Lin Yi waved his hand with a smile, and immediately turned to leave with Wu Yudi. Although it was good to meet Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo here, it was still a waste of time. It was better to hurry on with their journey. After watching Lin Yi and Hu Yudi leave, Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo were silent for a while. Qi Wenhan felt like 100 claws were scratching at his heart. His face and neck were red, and he struggled for a long time, but he could not say a word. Don't be fooled by his performance when he was forced into a dead end by young Master Yin and the other two. Unfortunately, in this kind of romantic moment, a person like him would be bashful and timid instead. He was even more timid than an ordinary person. He could not say the words he had said to young Master Yin and the other two even if he was beaten to death. Xia Luoluo was a little embarrassed. She couldn't help but feel angry and amused at the same time. It was fortunate that she had revealed her true feelings in the moment of danger. Otherwise, with this blockhead's personality, if they really wanted to be together, it would be impossible. He didn't know how long he would have to wait. Fortunately, we met Brother Ling this time. Otherwise, we would really be in trouble. Xia Luoluo sighed slightly, and could only take the lead to break the silence. Yes, I'm sorry, Luoluo. I was too careless this time. I didn't notice that these 3 people would target us from the beginning. I didn't protect you, Qi Wenhan said with a sad expression. It was really his negligence this time. As someone who came from a chaotic place like the South Continent Sea region, his sense of danger was much stronger than that of ordinary cultivators. However, at the thought of spending time alone with Xia Luoluo, he could not control himself. How could he pay attention to these hidden dangers? Originally, when they left the canyon, everyone scattered to gather according to their luck. He and Xia Luoluo's luck was not bad, and they soon found a unique natural treasure, but they did not expect it to become a source of disaster. Because the two of them had already been targeted from the beginning. No, if it wasn't for you, I would have been defiled by these 3 beasts. Xia Luoluo shook her head. After pausing for a moment, she suddenly said in a small voice, I really liked the words you said just now. Ah? What words? Qi Wenhan did not recover his senses for a moment. he asked stupidly. Stupid! Xia Luoluo was speechless and stomped her feet. She rolled her eyes at this silly boy who did not know how to flirt. She could only change the topic and say, That girl wearing a veil just now, if I remember correctly, should be a disciple of the East Continent's Morning Pride Academy. Is Brother Ling also an old acquaintance of hers? I don't know. It doesn't look like it. I only know that Brother Ling's two confidants are Wang Xinyan and Huang Xiaotao. They are both in the Morning Star Academy. Qi Wenhan shook his head. Is that so? But why do I feel that there's something between the two of them? If they just met, the progress wouldn't be so fast, right? Xia Luoluo could not help but ask curiously. Although it was not very obvious, but Hui Yudi and Lin Yi had clearly done something ambiguous. This did not escape her eyes, and it looked like Hui Yudi was the one who initiated it. Really? Qi Wenhan paused for a moment before coming back to his senses. He couldn't help but speak with envy. As expected of Brother Ling, he's too amazing. Even the beauties of the Eastern Continent have fallen for him. No wonder Wang Xinyan and Huang Xiaotao are so loyal to him. TSK. What? From your tone, it sounds like you're very envious? Xia Luoluo turned to look at Qi Wenhan, her tone strange. This, as long as it's a man. Qi Wenhan subconsciously replied. Only when he felt the killing intent did he react. His brain sped up for once. It's impossible to be like Brother Ling. Someone like Brother Ling only appears once every few thousand years. How can I compare to him? As long as I have one, I'll be satisfied. I can die without regrets. That's more like it. Xia Luoluo's lips curled into a slight smile. Although she had disguised herself, the flirtatious look she showed in that instant still made Qi Wenhan completely dumbfounded. Seeing Qi Wenhan's expression, Xia Luoluo could not help but lower her head shyly. She really was an idiot. On the other side, after Hui Yudi had followed Lin Yi for a while, she finally could not help but ask. Hey, after we find the Thunder Mystic Vine, you won't kill me, will you? Lin Yi, who was leading the way, lost his footing when he heard that. He was completely shocked by this girl's wild thoughts. What was she even talking about? Lin Yi turned around, speechlessly glancing at this girl who had no idea what she was thinking. With a mischievous face, he said, If you want to kill, you should kill first. Ah. I see. Then can you just kill without killing? Hui Yudi blinked. Pfft. Cough, cough, cough. Lin Yi immediately choked. Just now, he had only thought that this girl's thoughts were strange. Now, he was completely shocked. Just kill without killing? Was this an answer that a normal girl could think of? Wasn't Xia Luoluo's decision to rather die than submit the right way? Or was it that the East Continent was special, and they had been taught this way since they were young? Compared to reputation and integrity, preserving one's life was more important. Don't think that I don't know that you're not the kind of person who casually kills people. If you were really that cruel, you would have already killed Ren Zhongyuan and the others, Hui Yudi said with a face full of certainty. Chapter 4691. On the contrary, in the face of Ren Zhongyuan and the others' mockery and ridicule, Lin Yi remained calm from beginning to end. He didn't have the slightest intention of arguing with these ignorant people. This was extremely rare. At least if she was in Lin Yi's position, Hui Yudi wouldn't have such a calm temperament. Even if she didn't kill them on the spot to establish her dominance, she would definitely teach them a lesson. She obviously had a body full of strength, but after being mocked and ridiculed in front of her, she still acted like nothing had happened. How strong was her temperament? Little did they know that there was a special term for this kind of thing. It was called pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. Lin Yi had been an expert in this since the beginning of his career. If a few so-called geniuses who thought highly of themselves could make him impatient like this, then all of Lin Yi's previous cultivation would have been in vain. All right, I really admire you. Lin Yi smiled, looked at the girl, and said, Let's go quickly. Aren't you shy? You're still talking about it. Hui Yudi's pretty face turned red. This guy really brought up her sore spot. After the episode just now, she had finally put that embarrassing scene to the back of her mind. In the blink of an eye, this guy brought it up again. It was really infuriating. Looking at Hoyuri angrily walking in front, Linny could only shake his head speechlessly. He was puzzled. What was going on? Why did it feel like this girl suddenly became a lot more unyielding? A woman's heart was like a needle at the bottom of the sea. This saying was not false at all. Men could never figure out what a woman was thinking, because this in itself was an unsolvable proposition. As they continued forward, Hoyuri once again took the lead like she did at the beginning. With her strength of nascent soul stage, as long as she didn't become absent-minded, there was no problem at all for her to lead the way. Moreover, there was Linny behind her to protect her. Basically, even if there was any danger in front of them, before Hoyuri could react, he would have already killed it. There really wasn't any threat along the way. After a few hours, the sky gradually darkened again. A blood-red crescent moon appeared in the sky. It was hazy, giving people the feeling that the moon had grown hair. Linny looked up, pinched his chin, smacked his lips, and muttered, "Ma well yam? And with such a strong blood chi? This isn't an auspicious sign." However, on second thought, the land beneath his feet was a remnant of an ancient battlefield. To put it bluntly, it was a supermass grave since ancient times. Killing intent, baleful aura, and corpse aura were all gathered together. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was the most dangerous place in the world, so it was normal for the so-called blood-colored moon to appear. Linny himself didn't take it to heart. This kind of folklore was used to scare children. However, after Hoyuri, who was walking in front of him, heard his murmur, she suddenly stopped moving. Although she was an expert at the great perfection of the nascent soul stage, she was still a girl. No matter how strong she was still afraid of these legends. Especially at this moment, the blood-colored hairy moon above her head, no matter how she looked at it, it really made people panic. Originally, she was still walking in front of Linny with big strides, at least about 5 feet away from him. As a result, after Linny muttered this sentence, this chick suddenly fell in front of Linny. It was less than 5 feet in front and behind, and if he was not careful, he could step on her heel. But even so, Hoyuri still insisted on walking in front of him in a fit of pique. However, after walking for a while, the surrounding light was getting dimmer and dimmer. Even the blood moon hanging in the air was looming, and it even gradually disappeared in the thick clouds. After a while, there was no light in the surroundings. This was the darkness before dawn. Hoyuri really couldn't stand it anymore. She said weakly, "Can we walk later? I feel a little tired." As she said this, she had unknowingly fallen behind Linny. Because there was not even a bit of light in the surroundings, she really did not have the courage to continue walking in front. Even at this moment, even following behind Linny made her feel a little afraid. Without any light, unless she constantly used her divine sense like Linny, she would not be able to lock onto Linny's position, even if Linny was less than 10 feet in front of her. It was a pity that she was not Linny. She did not have an endless supply of spirit chi, and the strength of her divine sense was far from as tough and powerful as Linny's. If she had to use her divine sense at all times, let alone finding the Thunder Xian vine, just halfway through the journey would cause her spirit to collapse. But fortunately, compared to ordinary cultivators, Hoyuri had a special talent. She could follow Linny's scent and move forward. It was just that this method could only determine a general direction, and could not accurately lock onto him like divine sense, so she inevitably felt a little nervous. Tired? Linny, who was walking in front, was stunned when he heard this. He did not look back, but directly used his divine sense to size up Hoyuri. Seeing that her body was slightly trembling, he immediately understood and could not help but feel a little funny. He said, "Are you afraid? You are the one who is afraid. I have experienced all kinds of trials in the past, and there are many that are more dangerous than this." "This is nothing," Hoyuri stubbornly said. "Oh, then rest for a while." Linny found it funny, but he did not insist. Since Wuyuri was afraid, then stop and rest for a while. Anyway, the darkness before dawn would only last for a while, and it would be sunrise soon. And Wuyuri heaved a sigh of relief. She immediately hugged her legs and sat down. She was a morning beauty, but she wasn't a spoiled young lady. She was already used to sitting on the ground in the wild. After a moment of silence, feeling that Linny was still standing next to her, Wuyuri suddenly frowned and pouted. "Why are you standing in front of me? Do you want to peek at my collar?" Pfft! Linny almost choked again. He did not know why, but after interacting with this girl for a long time, she could always inexplicably come up with a stroke, making him not know whether to laugh or cry. "What can I see in this dark and windy night?" She could not even see the figure in front of her clearly, and she could still peek at his collar. What kind of strange logic was this? "Humph, others can't see, but maybe you can." Wuyuri curled her lips and said, You overestimate me. My eyes are not specially trained like your nose." "Don't worry, what you can't see, I can't see either." Linny helplessly spread out his hands. Chapter 4692. "Then what do you think I should do?" Linny was completely helpless. This chick's clothes were tightly wrapped from top to bottom. Although her figure was graceful and attractive, it was simply a fool's dream to say that there was something substantial on her body. Was she afraid that he would peek at her neckline? Especially in such an environment where one couldn't even see their own fingers? "Sit down, but don't sit too far from me. If you sit too far away, who knows if your place is higher?" Wuyuri said after thinking about it. "Okay, I really give up." Linny really couldn't complain at this time, so he could only sit next to her. He couldn't help but wonder how this chick's brain worked. Why was her thinking circuit so different from ordinary people? In fact, Wuyuri's face was also red at this time. She didn't know why, but she inexplicably wanted Linny to sit with her, so she racked her brain to find so many strange reasons. It wasn't that there was something wrong with her brain. The moon was dark, and the wind was strong. Everything was silent, and there was no one around. Linny and Wuyuri sat side by side, either of them talking, but they could clearly feel each other's breathing and heartbeat. It was a very subtle feeling, as if the two of them had unknowingly gotten closer to each other, especially when the awkward scene from before flashed through their minds. The atmosphere couldn't help but become a little flirtatious, and one couldn't help but blush. Wuyuri hurriedly shook her head with all her might. If she continued to let her thoughts run wild, she reckoned that her brain would be fried. When she was with this guy, why did she always think of such shameful things? "What are you doing?" Linny turned his head and looked at her strangely. Although it was too dark to see clearly, he could still clearly feel the other party's shaking movement. Could it be that this chick didn't get rid of the poison completely, and there was a side effect on her body? "No, nothing, what am I doing?" Wuyuri was shocked, and quickly denied it with a red face. She suddenly found an excuse and said, "There are mosquitoes here." "Mosquitoes?" Linny was suddenly stunned. How could there be mosquitoes in this barren land? Even if there were, his divine sense was always open. Any movement within 100 feet could not be hidden from the omnipresent divine sense. How could he not sense it? "Yes, mosquitoes." Wuyuri bit to death. Afraid that Linny would continue to question her, she quickly changed the topic. "Do you know, I have never known who my parents are since I was young? The only reason I am still alive is because Master found me in the wild. Otherwise I would have been an abandoned baby, and not even my bones would have been left." "Oh, I'm about the same as you." Linny nodded. He didn't expect that this girl would have such a life experience. She seemed to be in the same boat as him. Didn't you come from the secular world?" Wuyuri couldn't help but be surprised, but she immediately realized that she had asked a stupid question. Whether or not they came from the secular world had nothing to do with their origins. There were abandoned babies on Heaven's Stage Island, so naturally, there were also abandoned babies in the secular world. "Yes, I have a grandfather in the secular world who is half a master and half a senior, including medical skills. He was the one who taught me all kinds of miscellaneous things that I have. At that time, I was tormented by him a lot. Hee. Linny couldn't help but sigh. After coming to Heaven Stage Island for so long, he didn't know how Old Man Lin was doing now. However, what made him feel more at ease was that, from the replies from the people in the secular world, Old Man Lin was living quite comfortably in the West Star Mountain village, and Aunt Ching was finally with him. From this point of view, Old Man Lin was actually quite lucky, and there was really nothing to worry about. Me too. Master is the same to me. Without her, I wouldn't be who I am today. Hui Yudi nodded repeatedly. With such a similar life experience, she suddenly felt that the distance between her and Lin Yi was closer. Maybe they would have a lot in common. After a pause, she changed the topic and asked, "Then, do you want to go back to the secular world? Is this place better or the secular world better?" "Naturally, the secular world," Lin Yi answered without hesitation. It was true that in terms of strength and cultivation conditions, 10,000 secular worlds couldn't compare to one Heaven Stage Island. However, he always believed that the secular world was his root. Without the secular world, there would be no him, and he wouldn't have reached his current level. Moreover, most of the women he cared about the most were in the secular world. The eldest miss and the others were still waiting for him to go back and save them. Therefore, no matter what, even if he had to pay all the price, Lin Yi must return to the secular world. This was his greatest wish and goal. Why? Is it because there are rich men and universities there? Hui Yudi suddenly asked curiously. Both. Lin Yi almost choked again. Why is this girl so persistent about rich men? I just mentioned it casually at the beginning, but I didn't expect her to keep it in mind. As for universities, it was probably because he mentioned it casually that she remembered it. However, from this point alone, it could be seen that this girl should be quite interested in the secular world. It felt similar to Shangguan Laner. They were the kind of people who were full of fantasies and longing for the secular world. No wonder. That guy Ren Zhongyuan always likes to go to the Central Chamber of Commerce to buy some strange things. He said that they are all imported goods from the secular world. They are all very useful. It seems to be very popular recently. When Hui Yudi said this, she couldn't help but think of the camera. It was a good thing that Ren Zhongyuan spent a lot of money to buy. At first, when he said that he would give it to her, she was actually very interested and almost accepted it on the spot. However, in the end, her disgust for this guy prevailed. She gritted her teeth and pushed the camera back. Now that she thought about it, although she didn't regret it, she still felt a little regretful. Well, you can say that. Lin Yi nodded. The biggest role of the Central Chamber of Commerce after its emergence was to set off a wave of technology on Heaven Stage Island. This greatly improved the status of the secular world on Heaven Stage Island. Now, when the secular world was mentioned again, at least no one would say that the secular world was useless. As far as these technological products were concerned, although they weren't like divine weapons or elixirs that could play a substantial role for cultivators, many of their functions were still very practical. Even the top big shots on Heaven Stage Island had to admit that in some aspects, even high-level cultivators were inferior to them. For example, the camera and the mobile phone that Lin Yi carried. Chapter 4693. As for the mobile phone, although Lin Yi had not personally tested whether there was a signal or not, if there was no such thing, it was impossible to achieve long-distance communication. The so-called 1,000-mile sound transmission was just an illusory legend. In reality, no one had seen it. Strictly speaking, the mobile phone was the real 1,000-mile sound transmission. If there is a chance, Hui Yudi suddenly said. En? Lin Yi frowned and waited for her to continue. If there is a chance, take me. Hui Yudi was still hesitating. The more she spoke, the more shy she became. In the end, her voice was so low that it could not be heard. Only she could guess. En? Lin Yi turned his head and looked at her strangely. Although it was too dark to see clearly, he still subconsciously made this action. What does this chick want to express? Why is he acting so bashful? Could it be something very embarrassing? That shouldn't be the case, right? Although they had that awkward scene, Linny felt that this chick should be a traditional woman in her bones. If there is a chance, take me to the secular world. When Linny couldn't help but let his imagination run wild, Yuri finally finished her words. However, her voice was so low that even Linny could barely hear it. You want to go to the secular world? Linny couldn't help but be surprised. This sentence was a bit familiar. In his memory, Shanghai Laner seemed to have said something similar. If you don't want to take me, then forget it. I am just curious. Yuri pouted. If you want to go, of course you can, but the premise is that I can go back. It is not easy to go from the secular world to the heavenly island. It is even more difficult to go back from the heavenly island to the secular world. We will see when the time comes. Linny sighed. Although this chick's brain was strange and a little incomprehensible, he didn't hate it. At least from the bottom of his heart, he had begun to treat this chick as a friend. Not a purely beneficial partner. Yeah, I have never heard of anyone who can go back. She heard Linny's sigh. Yuri hurriedly explained. I'm just saying. I don't have any other meaning. Don't take it seriously. Since you've already said it, how can I not take it seriously? Let's see if there's a chance. If I can go back, I'll call you. Linny smiled. Although it was indeed very difficult to return to the secular world from Heaven's Stage Island, according to the information he currently had, it would be very difficult. In fact, the probability of success was not as low as one would imagine. Thinking about it carefully, there were at least 3 options. The first option was also the most reliable one, and that was to find Zhang Liju. That damn thing's personal experience had proven that he had a reliable way, and with his relationship with Zhang Liju, as long as he could find him, he believed that Zhang Liju wouldn't reject him right away. The only difficulty was when they would be able to meet this legendary figure who was elusive and elusive. As for the second method, it fell on the Central Chamber of Commerce. It was very clear that the Central Chamber of Commerce had a way to freely travel between Heaven's Stage Island and the secular world. If they could find a way to find out, naturally, Lin Yi would have a chance. However, this method was much more difficult than the first one. After all, the Central Chamber of Commerce had a lot of strong practitioners. Although Lin Yi could kill profound ascension practitioners in seconds, if he really went in, he would still end up as a corpse on the street. As for the third method, it fell on Han Jingjing. Although it was a bit ridiculous for her to research the mystery of the teleportation circle between Heaven's Stage Island and the secular world, which of her previous research wasn't a miracle, as long as she had enough conditions and time. Lin Yi really didn't think that this was impossible. And Yuri couldn't help but feel a little happy, although she knew in her heart that after the West Island trial ended, this West Island trial, she and Lin Yi wouldn't have much interaction, but after hearing this, she felt a little expectant. If only she could really go to the secular world with this guy. As the two talked, the sky gradually brightened. Although the visibility was still not high, at least it wasn't as dark as before. After talking with Lin Yi for a while, Yuri was finally not afraid anymore, and the two immediately got up and continued on their way. However, not long after they walked, Lin Yi suddenly heard a soft rumbling sound beside him. He couldn't help but look towards the sound and saw Yuri with her head down and her face red. She was almost looking for a hole to hide in. Are you hungry? The corner of Lin Yi's mouth curled up a little. Practitioners don't need to eat, I'm not hungry. Yuri still had her head down and didn't dare to look at anyone, but she said it quite firmly. Hee. Lin Yi shook his head with a faint smile. Although it was true that practitioners didn't need to eat, it didn't mean that they really didn't eat. This was an innate instinct. Even if the body wasn't hungry, it would still have this reaction unconsciously after a long time. Just like Yuri's stomach growling, this was a clear proof. If practitioners really didn't need to eat, so many high-end restaurants on the Heaven Stage Island would have been closed long ago. How could it be seen everywhere now? Linny felt that the various kinds of delicacies on the Heaven Stage Island were no worse than those in the secular world. Some of them were even sold at a very high price, and there were still many diners and guests. Linny suddenly took out some extremely delicate and delicious pastries, turned his head and handed them to Wuyuti, saying, "Here, satisfy your craving. Where did you get them from?" Wuyuti's eyes widened in disbelief. Her throat squirmed uncontrollably, and she almost drooled. "I conjured them." Linny smiled mysteriously. "Ah?" Wuyuti couldn't help but be startled. She'd been watching him the whole time, and this guy clearly didn't bring anything with him. He didn't even have a normal backpack, and he came empty-handed. It wasn't strange for him to have some small treasures on him, but where did these delicate-looking pastries come from? Wuyuti thought to herself. It couldn't really be conjured out of thin air, right? She had never heard of such a magical power in the world. "All right, don't be silly. Since there are ready-made ones, eat them quickly," Linny said and started eating first. "Wait, leave some for me." Wuyuti looked really greedy, and immediately stopped thinking about how these things were conjured. She quickly snatched a piece from Linny's hand and ate it in small bites. Chapter 4694. Linny looked at Wuyuti's careful eating and couldn't help but smile. These exquisite pastries were actually put into the jade space from the envoy's mansion in West Island. Anyway, the space was very large. Now he put whatever he saw in it, so that he could be prepared. The two divided the pastries Linny took out. After eating, Wuyuti wiped the corner of her mouth with some desire. At this time, Linny suddenly said, "Do you want more?" "Ah? You have more?" Wuyuti was shocked again. She looked at Linny up and down as if she was looking at a monster. What was this guy made of? He didn't even carry a bag when he went out. How could he hide so many pastries at will? "Yes, if you want to eat, I will definitely make sure you are full." Linny nodded. "Ugh! I think I'll pass." Wuyuti shook her head after some hesitation. Eating was just a habit to her, and it wasn't necessary for her to eat too much. A girl eating so much in front of others would be laughed at. She didn't know why, but she didn't want to be laughed at by this guy. "Oh, then forget it." Linny put it away indifferently. Wuyuti suddenly felt depressed again. Why was this guy like this every time? Once he said no, he immediately let it go. Couldn't he ask again? Didn't he know that girls should be more reserved? What the hell was this chick doing? Seeing Wuyuti sulking and walking away, Linny couldn't help but shake his head helplessly. Women were difficult to understand, and this chick changed every now and then. It was especially difficult to understand. However, Linny didn't need to understand. He was with Wuyuti purely for the Thunder Xian Ratan. As long as it didn't interfere with this fundamental purpose, he would let this chick do whatever she wanted. The two hurried on their way again. As a result, after walking for less than an hour, the scene in the distance suddenly changed. That place was the opposite of the barren scene in the surrounding places. It was lush and green. It was like a fairyland on earth. Oasis? Linny was overjoyed. Anyone who had walked in this monotonous desert for 2 days and suddenly saw a rare oasis would definitely be overjoyed. For ordinary people, seeing such a lush green oasis in the desert was no less than grasping at a life-saving straw. For a cultivator like Linny, although it was not that exaggerated, his mood instantly improved. He could not help but feel refreshed just by looking at it from afar. Wuyuti's reaction was much more direct than Lin Yi's. After exclaiming excitedly, she immediately sprinted towards the direction of the oasis and walked for 2 whole days in the desert. Sitting and lying on the sand, her whole body was covered with dust, and it was extremely uncomfortable. What she wanted to do the most now was to find a clear spring and take a good bath. Upon seeing this, Linny did not try to dissuade her. Although it was somewhat dangerous for Wuyuti to run like this, it was not a big problem with him keeping an eye on her from behind. His divine sense had already spread out in advance, so if there was any danger, he would be able to detect it in advance. The two of them quickly approached this rare oasis, and Yuri could not wait to rush in. However, when she was about 1,000 feet away, she suddenly stopped and looked ahead with a frown. Why are there so many people? Linny was a little surprised and stopped beside her. He could not see anything from afar, but now that he was close, he clearly found that within this oasis that was not considered big, there were actually dozens of people gathered. There were actually dozens of people gathered there, and these people were all gathered in one place. They didn't scatter, and it felt like they were having a party. What should we do? Yuri could not help but turn her head to look at Linny nervously. She did not know when, but she had already unconsciously regarded Linny as the backbone. Could they also be here for the Thunder Xianratan? Linny looked at her and said. Those who appeared here were naturally the participants of this trial, and there was only one thing that could make them gather together. That was the treasure of heaven and earth, and it definitely could not be an ordinary treasure of heaven and earth. Only rare treasures like the Thunder Xianratan could cause such a big stir. I don't think so. Yuri thought for a while and said, although everyone knows about this ancient battlefield relic, the information about the Thunder Xianratan has always been confidential, and only a few people know about it. Unless someone spread the news with ulterior motives, it is impossible to gather so many people. If it really causes such a stir, the top management of West Island will definitely take action. Well, it makes sense. Linny nodded. The existence of the Thunder Xianratan was a rare strategic resource for the entire West Island. It was okay if only a few people inside knew about it, but if it really caused an uproar and everyone knew about it, West Island would inevitably fall into chaos. Ning Shangling might even directly give a kill order. At that time, it was estimated that none of these trial takers who knew the news would survive. It was related to the core interests of the entire West Island, and there was no room for mercy. Although we took the shortest route, after all, we were delayed for a day, so these people probably came here from other directions. Don't worry, this place is still far from the Thunder Xianratan. Yuri comforted him. That's good. Linny breathed a sigh of relief and looked ahead with a frown. But something must have happened there, or it is impossible for so many people to gather here. Let's be careful. Okay. Yuri also looked dignified. Although the oasis would naturally attract people to stop, it was definitely not a small matter that so many people gathered here inexplicably. Even if it had nothing to do with the Thunder Xianratan, they could not take it lightly. This is the only way, right? Linny asked. Yes, our destination is after the 10,000-year canyon, and this oasis is the only entrance to the 10,000-year canyon. Yuri nodded and said, then there's no other choice. Let's go. He took the lead and walked forward. Although there was definitely something wrong with this abnormal situation, it was just as I said before. A trial of this level was not difficult at all for him. At most, it was just a matter of luck. As for the danger, if he could not handle it with his strength, then the other trial takers would have died long ago. Yuri carefully followed behind Linny. She was not nervous in her heart, but instead had an intoxicating sense of security. Although this old-fashioned man was often unromantic, it had to be said that at least he gave people the feeling that he was very reliable. The two of them entered the oasis with caution. As soon as they entered the shade of the trees, they immediately felt a refreshing feeling of enlightenment, making them feel comfortable from head to toe. The tiredness from the journey was instantly swept away, and their entire body and mind involuntarily relaxed. Chapter 4695. Although the concentration of spiritual chi in this place could not be compared with that in the 5-poison swamp, it was still very rare. It was even much better than some specially built caves in the North Island. This oasis is the throat of the 10,000 years Grand Canyon. All the spiritual chi in and out of the 10,000 years Grand Canyon will gather here. That's why it's so rich. It's also because of this that this oasis appeared. Otherwise, it would definitely be a desert. Yuri explained behind him. It could be seen that in order to obtain the Thunder Xianratan, this girl had done a lot of research on this place. After all, unlike Linny, the primordial battlefield was still very dangerous for a perfected nascent soul cultivator like her. This oasis was not large, only a little more than 1,000 feet in radius. However, in such a small area, there were dozens of high-level cultivators gathered. Except for a few experts in the peak of the Gold Core realm, most of them were experts in the original infant realm. This was the mainstream strength of this trial. These people were gathered together at the moment, as if they were facing something together. Their faces were very dignified. Could it be that there was a terrible spirit beast blocking the way? Lin Yi and Hui Yuti's appearance didn't cause any commotion, nor did they attract anyone's attention. At this moment, everyone's attention was on the empty space in front of them. There weren't any frightening spirit beasts there, but a group of practitioners. It was just that this group of people had a ferocious aura, and they weren't friendly people. Following the gaze of the crowd, Lin Yi glanced forward, and then his eyelids twitched unconsciously. He was extremely shocked. The leader of the group in front of him, a fierce man with a scar on his face, was actually a profound ascending stage master. Lin Yi couldn't help but rub his eyes. Did he see it wrong? Wasn't it said that only nascent soul stage masters and below could enter this place? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to pass through the transmission array. Then what was going on with this profound ascending stage master? This fierce aura that was far above that of a nascent soul stage master couldn't be faked, right? Even if someone could fake his aura, it would definitely not be able to hide from Lin Yi's eyes. From head to toe, he could see that this scarred man was a genuine profound ascending stage master. Although he was only at the peak of the early stage of profound ascending stage, this guy appearing in this place. That in itself was already a huge piece of news. How about it? Is there anyone else who wants it? If you want to pass, hurry up and take out your money. As long as you take out enough heavenly materials and earthly treasures, I will let you pass. Don't worry, this 10,000-year Grand Canyon behind me is a primitive land that is rarely visited by humans. There are countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures inside, and it's very easy to recoup my losses. Ha ha! Scarface looked up to the sky and laughed wildly. After listening to his words, Lin Yi and Hui Yuti immediately understood. It turned out that this group of people hadn't gathered here to fight over any heavenly treasures, but to meet a mountain king who had occupied the mountain. According to Hui Yuti, the 10,000-year Great Canyon was a rare treasure land in the primordial battlefield. Because of the unique environment here, there were far more natural treasures than in other places. If one were to try their luck in the desert, they might not be able to find a natural treasure even after 10 days or half a month. However, in this 10,000-year Great Canyon, there were many natural treasures. It was said that as long as one walked patiently for a day, there would be a harvest. In addition, the judging standard of the West Island trial test was the treasure of heaven and earth, so it was natural. Any trial taker with a little bit of information would find a way to come here, unless it was someone like Ren Zhongyuan who had other intentions. Only then would they let go of this legendary treasure land. Now that this mountain king had occupied the only entrance here, it was equivalent to holding everyone's weakness, and they could only obediently let him do whatever he wanted. After all, in the face of such a cruel and unruly profound ascending stage master, these nascent soul stage cultivators were really helpless. After all, there was no other freak like Lin Yi in the 5 heavenly islands. Who could cross a great realm to challenge a profound ascending stage master? Damn it! If this guy was alone, with so many of us together, I believe that even if he was a profound ascending stage master, he wouldn't be able to handle it. It's a pity that he has so many followers. A person not far from Lin Yi whispered bitterly. There's no other way, we're really unlucky. We actually met this scar-faced man. It seems that there's no hope for this West Island trial. The West Island princess has such a good opportunity to choose a husband, sigh. Another person sighed. Why did this scar-faced man appear in this place? Isn't it impossible for profound ascending stage masters to enter? Lin Yi asked quietly behind them. Hey, it's another unlucky newcomer. The man heard the words and looked back at Lin Yi. When he saw Hui Yuti, his eyes lit up, but after all, he was wearing a veil, so he didn't show too much of a pervert. He just shook his head and smiled bitterly. I heard from those who came earlier that this scar-faced man seemed to be in the bottleneck of the nascent soul peak in a previous trial. As a result, he got some kind of adventure during the trial, and then accidentally broke through, so he couldn't get out, and could only be trapped here as a mountain king. So that's how it is. Linny glanced at Huiyuti subconsciously. This girl was also at the bottleneck of nascent soul mastery. She wouldn't meet the same fate if she wasn't careful, would she? This place was really dangerous, even a rare breakthrough could get her killed. That can only mean that his own strength is not enough. Controlling the realm of strength is a compulsory course for all East Continent college students, and it's the most basic. If he can't even do this, it can only mean that he can reach his current realm purely by luck, and his strength is seriously insufficient. Huiyuti rolled her eyes at Linny. Miss, are you from East Continent? The person just now glanced at Huiyuti again. Seeing that Huiyuti seemed to be too lazy to talk, he could only bitterly smile and say, That's right, but Scarface is a genuine early-stage profound ascension expert after all. No matter how strong a nascent soul stage is, in front of him, they are just vegetables. The situation is stronger than the person, what can we do? Yes, from what the scar-faced man said, he has been here for hundreds of years. The group of people around him also came back late from every trial, and in the end, they couldn't get out, so they were all gathered by him, and became a tyrant here. These people are all desperados, not to be trifled with. The others said with lingering fear. From your point of view, if we want to get to the Grand Canyon through here, we'll have to give him some treasures? Linny asked again, not agreeing or disagreeing with the question. If you want to pass through here, you have to pay for the passage. This is the rule set by this mountain king. If you don't have the strength to resist, don't you have to give him treasures? A person said. To be continued. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.